You need to turn around right now. Guests only beyond this point." The hand came flat against his chest, open palm, hard enough to stop a man mid-stride, hard enough to rattle the reading glasses tucked into his collar. 12 feet past the revolving door, the Bellacourt Hotel lobby, Scottsdale, Arizona. Saturday morning, 9:47 a.m. The man who had just been stopped wore khaki pants, a plain navy polo shirt, and carried a leather portfolio under his left arm. No briefcase, no luggage, no entourage. He looked like someone visiting a friend for coffee, which is exactly why the hand had stopped him, and not the 3 white guests who had walked through the same door in the past 4 minutes without a single question asked. The hand belonged to Chet Bowman, head of hotel security, 6'4", 250 pounds, crew cut, ex-corrections officer who still walked like the hallways were his to patrol. His name badge read Security Director in gold block letters on a black background, positioned over his heart like a small shield. The man he had just stopped was Marshall Ridley, 51 years old, Chief Executive Officer of Ashford Ventures Holdings, a private equity firm with a hospitality portfolio worth $1.2 billion. 72 hours ago, Marshall had signed the closing documents that made this hotel, every room, every lobby chair, every fire extinguisher, every paycheck, his. Chet Bowman had just put his hand on the chest of the man who owned the building and everyone in it. He had no idea. And by noon, that ignorance would cost him his career. If you think you know where this story is going, you are wrong. What happens in this lobby over the next 2 hours will change the lives of every single person inside it. Stay with me. Marshall looked at the hand on his chest, then at the posted lobby access sign mounted behind the concierge desk. Laminated, framed, eye level, the kind of sign designed to settle exactly this type of dispute before it became one. He had read it on the way in. The Bellacourt Hotel welcomes all visitors to our public lobby areas. Guest services, the restaurant, and the business center are accessible without a room key during operating hours. Management, revised March 2024. He did not point at it, did not quote it, did not argue. He stepped back, adjusted the portfolio under his arm, and turned toward the concierge desk instead, rerouting his path the way a man reroutes around a puddle, without complaint, without confrontation, without surrender. The portfolio under his arm contained 46 pages. Page 1 was a signature, his. Page 46 was a termination clause, theirs. And every employee in this building was listed between them. The revolving door pushed another guest into the lobby behind him, a white woman in yoga pants carrying a Starbucks cup. She walked past the security desk without breaking stride. No hand, no question, no checkpoint. Chet did not look at her. Marshall noticed. He always noticed. That was the skill that had built a 1,200-employee company from a single commercial lease in Tempe. The ability to see what a room was telling you before anyone in it started talking. He sat down in a leather chair near the business center corridor, set his coffee on the side table, opened his portfolio, and began to read. 3 days earlier, Wednesday afternoon, Marshall Ridley had been in Ashford Ventures' Phoenix satellite office on the 14th floor of a glass tower on Camelback Road, signing documents that would add the Bellacourt Hotel to his company's hospitality portfolio. The acquisition had taken 11 months, $340 million, a property group that included the Bellacourt and 2 sister hotels in Tucson and Flagstaff. His COO, Vivian Okafor, had set the signing binder on his desk at 2:45 p.m., along with a black coffee and a 1-page summary she called the Weather Report, her shorthand for what to expect when you walked into a new acquisition. The Bellacourt's been underperforming for 18 months, Vivian said. She stood across the desk, arms crossed, reading from her tablet. Guest satisfaction scores dropped 14% since last year. Staff turnover is double the Scottsdale market average. Maintenance budget is $300,000 below comparable properties, and the GM has been in the role for 6 years with no corporate oversight since the previous owner relocated to Dubai. Marshall signed the first page, then the second. Who's the GM? Margot Selby, mid-40s. Hospitality degree from UNLV. Decent resume on paper. Marriott, Hilton, 2 independent properties before the Bellacourt. But the numbers tell a different story. She's been running this place like a personal fiefdom. I want to see it before anyone knows I'm coming. Vivian lowered her tablet. The look she gave him was the same one she had given him at the Crown property in Memphis, the harbor acquisition in San Diego, and the resort deal in Asheville. The look that said she already knew what was coming and had already decided it was a bad idea. Marshall, you always do this. And I always learn something the executive briefing doesn't tell me. You also always end up in a situation that requires legal to make phone calls they shouldn't have to make on a Saturday. He signed page 3. Send the staff notification memo Wednesday afternoon. Standard language. New ownership. Site assessment within the week. Full cooperation expected. Don't include my name, just office of the CEO. Vivian made a note. Do you want advanced security at the property? No. A driver? No. A name badge that says, I own this hotel, please don't tackle me in the lobby? Marshall looked up from the binder. The corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile, but the architecture of one. I want to see what the building looks like when nobody's performing. And when it goes sideways? Then I'll know exactly what we bought. Vivian left the office at 3:15 p.m. The notification memo went out to the full Bellacourt staff directory at 4:18 p.m. Red receipts confirmed 23 of 31 employees opened it by end of business Wednesday. The general manager, Margot Selby, opened it at 4:22 p.m., 4 minutes after it arrived. By Saturday morning, the memo might as well have never existed. Marshall arrived at the Bellacourt at 9:32 a.m. on Saturday, driving himself in a rented gray Camry. No town car, no plate that read Ashford. Just a mid-sized sedan parked in the guest lot between a white Range Rover and a red Tesla. He walked the perimeter first, noted the cracked asphalt near the loading dock, noted the dumpster enclosure gate hanging off one hinge, noted the expired fire inspection certificate on the stairwell door, dated 14 months ago, which meant someone had either failed to schedule the reinspection or failed to post the updated certificate. Either way, a violation. He wrote it in his notebook. Small, black, the kind that fits in a back pocket and survives being sat on. He entered through the main lobby at 9:41 a.m. The revolving door was clean. The marble floor was polished. The chandelier above the reception desk threw prismatic light across the ceiling in a way that probably photographed well for the website. Surface presentation, acceptable. He wrote that down too. He counted the staff, 2 at the front desk, 1 concierge, 1 bellhop leaning against the luggage cart scrolling his phone, and Chet Bowman at the security station, watching the lobby like a man who believed every person who entered owed him an explanation for being there. Marshall sat in the lobby chair near the business center, set his coffee cup on the side table to his left, his notebook beside it, his pen parallel to the notebook's spine, each item equidistant from the next, each positioned for access without reaching. The habit of a man who had spent 12 years organizing supply chains for the United States Army, where everything had a place, and the place told you something about the person. Nobody in the lobby knew that. Nobody was supposed to. Not yet. He opened his portfolio and began reviewing the property assessment checklist Vivian had prepared, a 4-page document listing 47 items to inspect during his walkthrough: fire systems, a DA compliance, kitchen certifications, staffing ratios, guest-facing signage. Each item had a checkbox and a notes column. He had filled in 3 items from the exterior walk. 44 remained. 9:58 a.m. Marshall stood and walked toward the hotel restaurant. The entrance was flanked by a brass host stand and a chalkboard listing the breakfast specials: shakshuka, avocado toast, steel-cut oats. 3 tables visible from the entrance were empty. A 4th was being cleared by a busboy. The man behind the host stand wore a name tag that read Ronan, front desk supervisor pulling double duty as restaurant host, which told Marshall the property was either short-staffed or badly scheduled. Probably both. "Good morning," Marshall said. Table for one. Ronan Duff looked up from his seating chart. Late 30s, thin build, wire-rimmed glasses. The kind of face that arranged itself into helpfulness, the way a store mannequin arranges itself into fashion. The shape was right, but something behind it was missing. Do you have a reservation? No. I see 3 open tables. Ronan glanced at the dining room, then back at Marshall. We're actually on a 45-minute wait this morning. I can put your name down if you'd like. 45 minutes, 3 empty tables. Marshall did not argue. He nodded, gave his name, Ridley, and stepped aside. 90 seconds later, a white couple in matching tennis outfits approached the host stand. No reservation. Ronan greeted them with a smile that reached his eyes, the real version of the one he'd shown Marshall. Right this way. I've got a table by the window. He seated them immediately. No wait. No name taken. No 45-minute estimate. The table he chose was one of the 3 Marshall had pointed to. Marshall watched from the lobby corridor. He did not go back to the host stand. Did not make a scene. He opened his notebook, wrote the time, 9:59 a.m., and beneath it, front desk supervisor, fabricated wait time, selective enforcement, seated white couple immediately after refusing black guest. 3 tables open. He closed the notebook, returned to his lobby chair, sat down, continued reading. The next 40 minutes produced a catalog of small indignities, the kind that individually might be explained away as miscommunication or bad luck or an off day, but collectively built a structure as deliberate as the building itself. At 10:04 a.m., a housekeeper approached Marshall's chair. Her name tag read, Alma, late 50s, compact build, hair pinned under a navy bandana. She carried a feather duster in one hand and an apology in her posture. Excuse me, sir, I'm sorry to bother you. Are you waiting for someone? Marshall looked up from his portfolio. No, I'm reviewing some documents. Alma hesitated. The hesitation had a shape. It was the shape of someone who had been told to do something she did not agree with but could not refuse. I see. It's just, we've been asked to check on anyone who's been in the lobby more than 20 minutes without a room key. Who asked you to do that? Ms. Selby, the general manager. Marshall studied Alma's face. The discomfort was genuine. She was not the architect of this policy. She was its delivery mechanism. How long have you worked here, Alma? 11 years. And has this policy always been in place? Another hesitation. Longer. No, sir. It started about 2 years ago, around the time the guest complaints started showing up about... She stopped, looked over her shoulder toward the front desk, looked back at Marshall. I shouldn't say more. I'm sorry to have disturbed you. She walked away quickly, feather duster tucked against her hip like a weapon she wished she didn't have to carry. Marshall wrote in his notebook, Housekeeper, Alma, 11 years. Directed to monitor lobby visitors without room keys. Policy originated approximately 2 years ago per GM. Housekeeper uncomfortable with directive. Selective enforcement implied. He underlined the word selective. Then he turned to a fresh page and continued reading the property checklist as though nothing had happened. 10:14 a.m. Marshall walked to the lobby restroom. On the way, he passed the concierge desk, where a young woman in a Bellacourt blazer was helping a guest with dinner reservations. Behind her, taped to the wall at staff eye level, not visible to guests, was a printed memo on plain white paper. No letterhead, no authorization signature, no policy number. It read, Reminder, front of house staff should exercise discretion when non-registered visitors spend extended time in guest areas. If a visitor cannot produce a room key or reservation confirmation, please direct them to public seating in the business center or suggest the coffee shop across the street. Do not engage in extended conversation. Report to GM or security if the individual does not comply. No date, no author, no policy reference. A rule manufactured from authority and air, the same kind of fabricated directive that turned a public lobby into a checkpoint for people who looked like they didn't belong, as defined by the person holding the clipboard. Marshall pulled out his phone, photographed the memo, returned to his chair. At 10:21 a.m., Margot Selby appeared. She came from the administrative corridor behind the front desk, heels clicking a rhythm on the marble that announced her before her face did. Mid-40s, blonde hair in a chignon tight enough to change the geometry of her forehead. Lanyard badge with the Bellacourt logo, navy blazer over a cream blouse. The uniform of a woman who had built her authority one dress code violation at a time. She approached Marshall with the kind of smile that costs money to learn. Warm on the surface, transactional underneath. The smile of someone who has practiced removing people from spaces without using the word remove. "Good morning, sir. I'm Margot Selby, General Manager. I understand you've been enjoying our lobby this morning." The word enjoying carried weight. It was the word you used when you wanted to acknowledge someone's presence while simultaneously questioning their right to it. "I have," Marshall said. He did not stand, did not extend his hand, kept his portfolio open on his lap. "Are you a registered guest with us?" "No." "I see." The smile held, but something behind it recalculated. "Well, our lobby seating is typically reserved for hotel guests. I'd be happy to direct you to our business center. It's just down the corridor. Or there's a lovely coffee shop across the street on Scottsdale Road." Marshall looked at Margot. Then, at the posted lobby access sign behind the concierge desk. The same sign he had read on his way in. The same sign every guest and visitor could read if they cared to look. That sign says public lobby areas are accessible without a room key during operating hours. Margot's smile flickered. Not much. A half-second interruption, like a fluorescent light cycling. That sign is a general welcome statement. It doesn't override our operational discretion. Does your operational discretion apply to everyone in this lobby, or just to me? The question landed in the space between them like a stone dropped into still water. Margot's eyes moved, not to Marshall but past him, scanning the lobby for witnesses, for other staff, for the architecture of support she had built around herself. "Sir, I'm simply trying to ensure the comfort of all our guests. I'm not a guest, but I am in a public area, and I'm not violating any posted policy." Margot's jaw tightened. The smile was gone now, replaced by something sharper. The expression of a woman who was not accustomed to being quoted back her own signage by a man she had already decided did not belong in her building. "I'm going to have to ask you to leave. If you refuse, I'll be forced to contact local law enforcement." Marshall did not stand, did not raise his voice, did not flinch. "I'd like your full name and title for my records." "I already told you. Margot Selby, General Manager." He wrote it in his notebook. Date, time, full name, title. Her exact words. "I'm going to have to ask you to leave." "And what is your internal complaint procedure for incidents like this?" The question stopped her. Not because it was aggressive, because it was procedural. It was the question of someone who operated inside systems, not outside them. Someone who knew that every institution had a paper trail, and that the paper trail was where power lived. "We don't have a formal complaint process for non-guests," Margot said. "Then I'll file one with the entity that does." He opened his phone, dialed a number. The call connected on the second ring. "I'm at the Bellacourt. I need you to pull the staff notification log from Wednesday's closing." One sentence. No context, no explanation. The voice on the other end, Vivian Okafor, did not ask questions. She said, "On it, 20 minutes." Marshall ended the call, set the phone on the side table next to his coffee and notebook, looked up at Margot, who was still standing 3 feet away, her lanyard badge swinging gently against her blazer. "You can call the police if you'd like," he said. "I'll wait." Margot turned and walked back toward the front desk. Her heels hit the marble harder now. Not the confident rhythm of arrival, but the staccato of someone retreating to higher ground. She picked up the desk phone, dialed, and 12 minutes later, the Scottsdale Police Department sent a deputy to remove a black man from a lobby he owned. Chet Bowman materialized first, He had been watching from the security station, not intervening, not approaching, just watching. The way a dog watches a door before the doorbell rings. Now he moved, crossed the lobby in 8 strides, positioned himself between Marshall and the elevator bank, not touching but occupying space the way a wall occupies space. His shoulders blocked the brushed steel elevator doors. His feet were planted shoulder-width apart. His hands hung at his sides, fingers slightly curled. "Sir," the word was a formality. The tone was offense. "Ms. Selby has asked you to leave the property. I'm going to need you to comply." Marshall remained seated, portfolio on his lap, coffee untouched and cooling on the side table, notebook open. "I'm in a posted public area. I have not been asked to leave by the property owner, and the posted policy permits my presence." Chet leaned down, not far, just enough to change the geometry of the conversation from horizontal to vertical, from equals to authority. "I don't care about the sign. I care about the GM's directive. She says you go, you go." "Does she have the authority to override posted property policy?" "She has the authority to tell me to move you. And I'm telling you, move." Marshall did not move. 2 guests, a middle-aged couple in resort wear, paused near the concierge desk, watching. A bellhop set down a luggage cart and stared. The lobby had the charged stillness of a room that knows something is about to happen but cannot name it. Chet straightened, keyed his radio. "Front desk, this is Bowman. Confirm PD is en route for the trespass call." The radio crackled. Ronan's voice. "Confirmed. Dispatch says 10 minutes. Chet looked down at Marshall. 10 minutes. You can walk out on your own, or you can wait for the deputy to walk you out. Your choice." Marshall opened his notebook to a clean page, wrote the time, 10:38 a.m., and beneath it, Security Director, verbal threat of removal, physical positioning to block movement, radio confirmation of police call, no physical contact yet. He underlined the word. Then he continued reading. 9 minutes later, a Scottsdale PD cruiser pulled into the Bellacourt's front entrance. The light bar was off. No emergency, just a call. A deputy stepped out, adjusted his belt, and walked through the revolving door with the measured pace of a man who expected this to be simple. Deputy Arlo Keene, late 40s, lean build, sun-weathered face, 17 years on the force, body camera mounted on his chest, the red recording light activated as he entered the lobby. Timestamp, 10:47 a.m., badge number 4417, incident number SPD-2024-09281. Keene walked to the front desk first, not to Marshall, to Margot. This is what institutional alignment looks like. The person with the complaint gets the first conversation. The person being complained about gets the second. The narrative is set before the accused speaks a word. Margot's version took 90 seconds. Her voice carried the practiced cadence of someone who had called the police before, not panicked, not angry, just the calm recitation of a woman who expected to be believed. "Deputy, we have an unidentified male who has been occupying our lobby for over an hour. He's not a registered guest. I've personally asked him to leave. He refused. Our security director also asked him to leave. He refused again. I'm concerned for the safety and comfort of our guests." Unidentified, occupying, refused, concerned. 4 words, each one a brick in a wall designed to make Marshall look like a threat before anyone asked him what he was doing there. Keene nodded, walked toward Marshall. Chet fell in behind him, not leading, but present. The formation of a man who wanted to be close enough to the authority to borrow some of it. "Sir?" Keene stopped 3 feet from Marshall's chair, thumbs hooked in his duty belt. "I'm Deputy Keene, Scottsdale PD. I understand there's been a disagreement about your presence in the lobby. Can I see some identification?" Marshall reached into his back pocket, produced his Arizona driver's license, handed it to Keene without standing. Keene studied it, looked at Marshall, looked at the license, walked back to his cruiser to run it. 3 minutes later, he returned. "Mr. Ridley, your ID checks out. No warrants, no record." He handed the license back. The hotel management is asking you to leave. Now, you're in what appears to be a public area, and I can see the posted sign. I can't compel you to leave on a trespass call if you haven't been formally trespassed by the property owner." He paused. The pause was doing work. It was the pause of a man who had just stated the law correctly, but wanted to find a way around it. "That said, I'd recommend you consider leaving voluntarily. These situations have a way of escalating, and it would be better for everyone if we resolved this peacefully." Better for everyone, the phrase that means better for the people with authority and worse for the person without it. "Deputy, I have a legal right to be in this lobby. The posted policy permits my presence. I have not been asked to leave by the property owner, and I'm not going to waive that right to make this situation more comfortable for the people who are violating it." Keene blinked. The response was not what he had expected. He had expected anger or compliance or the specific kind of nervous cooperation that comes from a black man in a white space being told by a uniformed officer that leaving would be easier than staying. Instead, he got clarity, calm, and a sentence structure that sounded like it had been composed by someone who read contracts for a living. He turned back to Margot. "Ma'am, I've verified his identity. He has no criminal record. He's in a public access area per your own posted policy. Unless you're the property owner or have written authorization from the property owner to issue a formal trespass notice, I can't remove him." Margot's face performed a sequence of expressions, surprise, frustration, recalculation, that lasted perhaps 2 seconds, but contained an entire strategic reassessment. "I am the property authority. I'm the general manager. I have full operational discretion over this building." "I understand, ma'am, but a trespass removal under Arizona law requires either ownership authority or a written delegation of that authority. Do you have that documentation?" Margot did not have it. The previous owner, a Dubai-based holding company, had never issued a formal trespass delegation letter to the GM. It had never been necessary because the GM had never needed the law to remove someone. The social pressure of a security guard and a confident voice had always been enough. Until today. Keene remained on scene. He did not leave, but he did not act. His presence became ambient. A uniformed figure standing near the concierge desk, arms crossed, body camera recording, creating the impression of authority without exercising any. The kind of pressure that does not push but prevents movement. At 10:51 a.m., Ronan Duff approached Marshall with a clipboard. "Sir, I apologize for the confusion earlier. Hotel policy requires all non-registered visitors to complete a visitor registration form and provide government-issued identification for security verification purposes." He held out the clipboard. The form was a single page: name, address, phone number, purpose of visit, government ID number, vehicle description, estimated departure time. A data collection instrument dressed up as a security measure. Marshall looked at the form, then at Ronan. "What section of the Bellacourt's guest services policy requires visitor registration?" Ronan's smile held. "It's our standard procedure for non-guest visitors." "I'd like to see the policy document that establishes this procedure." It's an internal policy. I don't have the document on hand." "Then I'll decline to complete the form until I can review the policy it references." Marshall had already reviewed the Bellacourt's Guest Services Manual. It was included in the acquisition due diligence package. Section 4, Paragraph 2. Identification is required at check-in for registered guests only. Visitors to public areas are not subject to identification requirements. The form Ronan was holding referenced a policy that did not exist. "Sir, I'm trying to help you." Ronan's voice rose on the word help, the kind of emphasis that turns assistance into accusation. "If you just fill out the form, this whole situation goes away." "I don't need this situation to go away. I need it to be documented." Marshall wrote in his notebook, "Front desk supervisor, fabricated visitor registration policy, no supporting documentation, presented clipboard form as mandatory. Policy does not exist per Guest Services Manual, Section 4.2. Ronan retreated to the front desk. Clipboard untouched. This is the moment the dominoes start falling. If you're watching this story unfold and you think this man has no recourse, keep watching. What's about to happen will rewrite the rules of this entire building. At 10:53 a.m., everything changed direction. Marshall stood to use the restroom. He had been seated for over an hour. His coffee was cold. His notebook had 7 pages of entries. His portfolio lay closed on the side table, the 46 pages inside it, still unread by anyone in the building except him. He walked toward the lobby restroom, a straight path, 12 paces, past the concierge desk and the elevator bank. Chet Bowman stepped directly into his path. "Where do you think you're going?" "The restroom." "Not without an escort." The word escort landed in the lobby like a slap. 2 guests at the concierge desk turned. The bellhop who had been pretending to organize luggage tags stopped pretending. Even Deputy Keene, still standing near the front desk, shifted his weight. "I'm walking to a public restroom. I don't need an escort." "You need what I say you need." Marshall stepped to the left, moving to walk around Chet. Chet sidestepped with him. A mirror movement, deliberate, blocking the path. Marshall stepped right. Chet followed. The geometry was unmistakable. This was not a conversation. This was containment. Marshall looked past Chet, directly at the lobby security camera mounted above the concierge desk. He noted its position, noted the angle, noted that it was recording. Then he looked at Deputy Keene, who was watching from 15 feet away. Watching, not moving. "Deputy, you're witnessing what's happening here." Keene said nothing, did not move. Marshall looked back at Chet. "Step aside." "Make me." The 2 words hung in the marble and glass lobby like a dare issued in a cathedral. They were an invitation to violence. A specific, calculated invitation designed to provoke a physical response that would justify everything Chet wanted to do next. Arrest, restraint, removal. The full machinery of force, activated by the victim's reaction to the aggressor's provocation. Marshall did not accept the invitation. He stood still, hands at his sides, weight balanced, spine straight. "I'm going to walk past you. If you put your hands on me, you will be committing battery under Arizona Revised Statutes, Section 13-1203. The camera above the concierge desk will record it. The deputy's body camera will record it. And I will pursue every legal remedy available to me." He said it without raising his voice, without clenching his fists, without the performance of anger that Chet was waiting for, the raised voice, the stepped-up chest, the pointed finger that could be reframed later as aggression. Chet did not step aside. Marshall walked forward. Chet's hand shot out and grabbed Marshall's left wrist. Not a touch, a grab. Fingers wrapped around the wrist and squeezed, hard enough to feel the bones shift, hard enough that Marshall's hand went involuntarily open, his pen dropping to the marble floor with a click that sounded louder than it should have in the sudden silence of the lobby. Marshall did not pull away, did not swing, did not push. He looked at Chet's hand on his wrist, looked at the camera, looked at Keene. "Deputy, he just grabbed my wrist. Are you going to intervene?" Keene took a half-step forward, then stopped. The half-step was a calculation, the physics of a man deciding whether the paperwork of intervention was worth the trouble of contradicting a hotel security director who probably had lunch with half his precinct. "Let's everybody just calm down," Keene said. The phrase of a man who wants the situation to resolve itself so he can leave. "I am calm," Marshall said. "He's the one holding my wrist." Chet released him. Not because of Keene's suggestion, because he realized the camera was recording, the deputy's body camera was recording, and the guest at the concierge desk had just raised a phone. Marshall rubbed his wrist once. The skin was red. 4 finger-shaped marks beginning to darken against his brown skin. He looked at his wrist, looked at Chet, looked at the camera one more time. Then he folded his hands behind his back, feet shoulder-width apart, weight centered, spine aligned. A posture that had no name in the lobby, but had a very specific name in military training. Parade rest. the stance of a man who has been trained to stand still while the world around him loses its composure. Nobody in the lobby could name it, but everyone in the lobby felt it. The quality of Marshall's stillness had changed, from patience to something harder, something that looked like waiting, but was actually preparation. He walked to the restroom. This time, no one stopped him, but Chet followed. Not into the restroom, to the corridor outside it. He stood with his back against the wall, arms folded, blocking the return path the way a bouncer blocks a VIP section. When Marshall emerged 40 seconds later, Chet was 3 feet from the door. "Feel better?" Marshall said nothing, stepped left. Chet did not move to block him this time, but he fell into step behind him, close enough that Marshall could hear the creak of his leather belt, the jingle of his key ring, the controlled breathing of a man who wanted another chance at the confrontation he had lost. They reached the lobby. Marshall returned to his chair. Chet stopped 4 feet behind it and stood there, directly behind Marshall, visible to every guest in the lobby, projecting the unmistakable image of a man under guard. A couple at the concierge desk, mid-60s, matching golf visors, stared. The woman leaned toward her husband. Her whisper carried farther than she intended. What did he do? Nothing. He had done nothing. But the staging told a different story. The staging said dangerous. The staging said watch him. The staging said this man is a problem, and the man in uniform is protecting you from it. Marshall felt the presence behind him. Did not turn. Did not acknowledge it. He opened his portfolio and continued reading the property assessment. Page 12, kitchen ventilation compliance, as though the man standing behind his chair did not exist. 2 minutes later, a new element entered the lobby. A family of 4, black, matching resort wear, 2 children under 10, walked through the revolving door pulling rolling suitcases. They were guests, checked in. Room key cards visible in the father's hand. Chet left his position behind Marshall's chair and intercepted them at the elevator bank. Room number? The father, tall, broad-shouldered, bewildered, held up his key card. 622. We're checked in. I need to verify that. Wait here. Chet took the key card, walked to the front desk, and handed it to Ronan. Ronan swiped it. Confirmed. Chet returned the card and stepped aside without apology. The interaction took 90 seconds. 90 seconds that the family of 4 spent standing in a hotel lobby, luggage at their feet, children confused, being verified. In the same lobby where white guests walked to the elevator without a single question. Marshall watched, wrote in his notebook, 10:56 a.m., black family, 2 adults, 2 children, checked-in guests with visible key cards, intercepted, and ID verified at elevator by security director. No white guests subjected to same verification during observation period, 9:41 a.m. to present. Differential enforcement documented. The father caught Marshall's eye as the family moved toward the elevator. The look lasted 1 second. It contained no words but an entire shared vocabulary. The vocabulary of men who have been stopped in lobbies, questioned in parking lots, watched in stores, verified in their own neighborhoods. The vocabulary of, "Do you see this?" And "Yes, I see it. Every time." The elevator doors closed. The family disappeared. Chet returned to the security station. At 10:58 a.m., Margot Selby made another attempt. She crossed the lobby carrying a printed document, a single sheet, freshly printed, still warm from the office printer. "Mr. Ridley?" She said his name now. She had learned it from Ronan's seating list. "I've prepared a formal trespass notice. Under my authority as general manager, I am directing you to vacate the property immediately. If you do not comply, I will instruct Deputy Keene to effect your removal." She placed the document on the side table next to Marshall's coffee. He picked it up, read it. The notice was handwritten at the top. Trespass notice. Bellacourt Hotel, in block letters. Beneath it, a typed paragraph citing managerial authority pursuant to hotel operational guidelines, and the safety and security concerns of registered guests. At the bottom, Margot Selby, General Manager, with a signature and the current date. The notice did not cite a statute, did not reference a property code, did not identify the property owner, did not contain a delegation of authority clause from the actual owner, because the actual owner was sitting in the chair in front of her, and she did not know it. Marshall set the document down. This notice is signed by you, not by the property owner. Under Arizona law, a trespass notice must be issued by the property owner, or an authorized agent with documented delegation of authority. You have neither. I am the authorized representative of this hotel. As of 72 hours ago, the entity you represented no longer owns this hotel. Your authority to issue trespass notices terminated when the acquisition closed on Wednesday at 3 p.m. He paused. You would know that if you had read the memo that was sent to your inbox at 4:18 p.m. the same day. The memo she had read. The memo with the confirmed read receipt. The memo she was now pretending did not exist. Margot's face went rigid. The mask of professional composure, the one she had maintained through customer complaints, staffing crises, health inspections, and every other challenge of 6 years in hotel management, cracked. Not dramatically, not visibly to anyone standing more than 5 feet away. But to Marshall, who was 3 feet away and had spent a career reading rooms, the crack was unmistakable. She picked up the trespass notice, folded it, put it in her blazer pocket, turned, and walked back to the front desk. She did not issue another notice. She did not speak to Marshall again until the moment the acquisition documents were placed on the concierge counter, and the world she had built inside this building collapsed around her. While Marshall was in the restroom, something happened at the back office terminal that would later become the most damning piece of evidence in the entire incident. Janine Pratt, assistant manager, 32, 3 years at the Bellecourt, sat at the administrative workstation behind the front desk. She had been watching the lobby confrontation from the doorway of the back office, listening to Margot's calls, watching Chet's escalation, noting the deputy's presence, and she had made a decision. She opened the hotel's internal staff portal, navigated to the corporate communications folder, found the email from Wednesday, the one sent at 4:18 p.m. from the office of the CEO, Ashford Ventures, informing all Bellecourt staff that the hotel had been acquired and that a representative of the new ownership group would conduct a site assessment within the week. Janine had read the email on Wednesday. She had opened it, processed the information, and, like most of the staff, filed it under things that don't affect me yet, and moved on with her shift. But now, watching a black man in the lobby calmly resist removal while citing the posted access policy, watching Margot escalate toward law enforcement, watching Chet grab a wrist on camera, now the email mattered. Because if that man was the representative mentioned in the email, if the person Margot was trying to remove was the person sent by the company that now owned the building, then everything happening in the lobby was not just wrong. It was a career-ending catastrophe. Janine looked at the email, looked at the lobby, made a second decision. She highlighted the email, right-clicked, deleted it. Then she opened the trash folder, deleted it again. Permanent removal. The server log recorded the deletion. Timestamp, 10:52 a.m. User, J. Pratt, Assistant Manager. File, BH-ACQ-2024-0914. Ashford Ventures, Bellecourt Acquisition Closing. Janine did not know that Ashford Ventures' IT department had automatic backup protocols on all acquired properties' digital systems. The email she had just deleted existed on 3 separate servers, including one she had no access to and no knowledge of. The deletion would take 24 hours to discover, but when it surfaced, it would transform Janine Pratt from a bystander into an active participant in the obstruction of a corporate ownership transition. She closed the portal, smoothed her blazer, walked back to the lobby as though nothing had happened. Marshall returned from the restroom at 10:57 a.m. His wrist was still red. He sat down in his lobby chair, the same chair he had occupied for over an hour, and opened his portfolio. He did not look at Chet, did not look at Margot, did not look at Deputy Keene. He looked at his phone, which had vibrated twice while he was in the restroom. 2 text messages from Vivian Okafor. The first, staff notification log pulled. Memo sent 4:18 p.m. Wednesday. 23 of 31 read receipts confirmed. GM account shows read at 4:22 p.m. The second, portal status check. Memo has been deleted from shared staff directory. Deletion occurred within the last 15 minutes. Pulling server backup and deletion audit trail now. Marshall read both messages, set the phone face down on the side table. Did not react. But something in the room had shifted. The balance of knowledge had tilted, invisibly, silently, in a way that no one else in the lobby could detect. Marshall now knew 3 things that changed the entire architecture of the situation. 1. The general manager had read the acquisition memo 3 days ago and was acting as though it did not exist. 2. Someone on the hotel staff had actively deleted the memo during the current confrontation, a deliberate act of evidence destruction. 3. The deletion had been captured, backed up, and was now being traced by a corporate IT team that answered directly to him. He picked up his coffee. It was cold. He drank it anyway. At 11:03 a.m., a guest approached Marshall. Felix Yoon, late 30s, Korean-American, crisp button-down, sleeves rolled to the elbows. He had been sitting in the lobby lounge with his wife and 2 children for the past 20 minutes, watching the entire confrontation unfold. He spoke quietly, the volume of a man who does not want the security guard to hear him, but wants the person he is speaking to hear him clearly. "Excuse me, I don't know what's going on, but I saw what happened at the restaurant earlier. The host told you there was a 45-minute wait and then seated that couple right after you. I'm a guest here, room 412, and I'd be willing to make a statement if you need one." Marshall looked at Felix. "Thank you. Do you have a card?" Felix handed him a business card. Felix Yoon, litigation support analyst, Rosenthal and Delacroix LLP, a man who worked in a law firm, a man who knew what evidence looked like. "I also recorded part of it," Felix said. "The restaurant interaction. I have it on my phone. Would you be willing to share that recording if it becomes relevant?" "Already emailed it to myself for safekeeping." Marshall wrote Felix's name and contact information in his notebook. Added, "Civilian witness, room 412, recorded restaurant discrimination, litigation support professional, unsolicited." Felix returned to his family. His wife glanced at Marshall with an expression that was harder to read, not sympathy exactly, but recognition. The look of someone who has seen this before, in other lobbies, in other buildings, in other cities where the sign said, "Welcome," but the people said something else. 11:09 a.m. Marshall's phone rang. Vivian Okafor. He answered and set the phone on the side table, speaker on. Not to perform, not to broadcast, but because his left wrist was still aching from Chet's grip, and holding the phone was uncomfortable. "Marshall?" Vivian's voice was flat, professional, the tone she used when she was furious but saving it for later. "The deletion audit is complete. The acquisition notification memo was permanently deleted from the Bellacourt staff portal at 10:52 a.m. today by user account J.Pratt, listed as assistant manager. The deletion occurred during the active incident, while police were on scene." "And the backup?" "Intact. 3 redundant copies. I've preserved the deletion log, the server timestamp, and the user credentials. Roland is reviewing the employee handbook for the applicable termination clause." "What section?" "Section 11.4, destruction of corporate records during ownership transition. It's a for-cause provision. No appeal." "Send Roland and Nina to the property. I want them here within the hour." "They're already in the car. I anticipated." Marshall ended the call, set the phone down, picked up his pen, the one that had fallen when Chet grabbed his wrist. It had rolled under the side table. He retrieved it, wiped it on his khakis, and placed it parallel to his notebook. Margot Selby had been standing near the front desk during the entire call. She was close enough to hear the words, "deletion and acquisition and corporate records and termination clause." She was not close enough to see Marshall's face, which had not changed expression throughout the conversation. But she was close enough to feel the temperature in the lobby drop. She walked to the back office, closed the door, made a phone call of her own, to a personal attorney whose number she had memorized but never expected to use on a Saturday morning. The next 26 minutes were the quietest of the day. Marshall sat in his chair. Deputy Keene remained near the front desk, his body camera still recording, his posture increasingly uncomfortable. Chet stood at the security station, arms crossed, jaw working. Ronan reorganized the host stand for the third time. Janine sat in the back office, refreshing the staff portal, looking for the email she had deleted, finding nothing. The lobby traffic continued. Guests checking out, families heading to the pool, a tour group assembling near the bellhop station. The machinery of a hotel operating around a confrontation that most guests did not notice, and the staff could not stop thinking about. At 11:12 a.m., Tomas Delgado, the hotel valet, 53 years old, 9 years at the Bellecourt, approached Marshall's chair. "Mr. Ridley, I moved your Camry from the loading zone to spot 14. Didn't want you getting a ticket." He held out the keys. "Not sir, not buddy, not pal. Mr. Ridley." The name from the acquisition memo, the memo he had read on Wednesday before it was deleted. The memo that told him exactly who was coming and what it meant. Tomas knew. He had known since Marshall walked through the revolving door. He had watched the entire confrontation, the restaurant denial, Margot's demand, Chet's grab, the deputy's inaction, and he had said nothing. Not because he approved, because it was not his place to protect Marshall from the people whose behavior was proving everything the new ownership needed to see. Marshall took the keys. "Thank you, Tomas." Tomas nodded once, turned, walked back to the valet stand. He did not look at Margot, did not look at Chet, did not look at the deputy. He looked at the lobby doors, waiting for the next car, as though nothing had changed. But the way he had said Mr. Ridley, with a specific, quiet gravity, the way you address someone whose authority you recognize even when no one else in the room does, had changed the air. One person in the building knew, and his silence was louder than Chet's threats. At 11:22 a.m., Chet Bowman made his second mistake. He had been pacing near the security station. Short loops, 6 steps out, 6 steps back. The restless circuit of a man whose authority had been checked and who could not sit still with the bruise of it. He kept glancing at Marshall, at the portfolio, at the phone on the side table. Each glance tightened the wire inside him. Then he walked to Marshall's chair. He did not stop at a respectful distance. He walked directly into Marshall's personal space, close enough that his belt buckle was level with Marshall's line of sight, close enough that Marshall could smell the starch in his uniform shirt and the spearmint gum working between his back teeth. He leaned down until their faces were 18 inches apart. "I don't know who you think you called. I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but I've been doing security in buildings like this for 15 years, and I've never once had a trespasser sit in a lobby and make phone calls like he owns the place." He jabbed his index finger toward Marshall's chest. Not touching, but close. An inch from the polo shirt. The gesture of a man who knows he cannot grab again, but wants the threat to be felt. "When the police come back, and they will come back, you're going to wish you'd left when I told you to." Then he did something new. He reached down and picked up Marshall's portfolio from the side table, held it up. "What's in here that's so important, huh? What are you reading that's worth getting arrested over?" Marshall stood, not fast, measured, the motion of a man uncoiling from a chair the way a spring uncoils from compression. He was 4 inches shorter than Chet and 60 pounds lighter, but when he stood, the geometry of the confrontation shifted. Something in his posture, the squared shoulders, the level chin, the hands that stayed open and visible at his sides, communicated a physical vocabulary that Chet recognized instinctively, even if he could not articulate it. "Put it down." 2 words, no volume, no vibration. The kind of quiet that combat veterans use when the situation has one path left and the other person needs to choose it now. Chet held the portfolio for 3 more seconds. 3 seconds in which the lobby cameras recorded the head of hotel security holding the personal property of a guest, property containing legal documents, financial instruments, and a photograph of the man's deceased mother, above the reach of its owner. Then he set it down. Hard. The leather slapped the marble side table. The brass clasp rang. Marshall did not flinch, did not blink. He picked up the portfolio, inspected the clasp, scratched now, the brass scored where Chet had dropped it, and set it back on his lap. "Are you finished?" "I'm just getting started." "Then you should know that everything you've said in the last 30 seconds has been recorded by the deputy's body camera, the lobby security camera, and my phone." He nodded toward the side table where his phone sat face up. The screen was active. The voice recorder app was running. A red waveform pulsed across the display. Chet looked at the phone, looked at the camera, looked at Keene's body camera. And for the first time since the confrontation began, something moved behind his eyes that was not anger or contempt. It was fear. He straightened, stepped back, walked to the security station without another word. At 11:35 a.m., a black Suburban pulled into the Bellecourt's main entrance. Not a guest vehicle, no luggage, no reservation. 3 people stepped out, each carrying something that changed the weight of the building. Vivian Okafor carried a tablet displaying the recovered server logs, the deletion audit trail, and the red receipt confirmation for every staff member who had opened the acquisition memo on Wednesday. Roland Gaines, Ashford Ventures' general counsel, 58, gray suit, the expression of a man who had canceled a golf game and was going to make someone pay for it, carried a leather folio containing a notarized copy of the acquisition closing documents, the corporate authority resolution, and a printed copy of the Bellecourt Employee Handbook with 3 sections flagged in yellow. Nina Falk, head of HR 44, red hair, the practiced calm of a woman who had terminated executives in conference rooms where the view was worth more than most people's houses, carried a laptop and a wireless printer. They did not stop at the front desk, did not ask for directions, did not explain themselves. They walked through the lobby in formation, Vivian first, Roland second, Nina third, and stopped directly in front of Marshall's chair. Vivian set the tablet on the side table next to Marshall's cold coffee. The screen showed the server log, the deletion timestamp, the user credentials, the email subject line. Every character a piece of evidence. Roland set the closing documents on the lobby table, opened them to the signature page. The signature read, Marshall T. Ridley, Chief Executive Officer, Ashford Ventures Holdings, LLC, on behalf of all subsidiary entities, including the Bellecourt Hotel Property Group. Nina opened her laptop on the adjacent chair. The printer hummed. The lobby went quiet. Not the quiet of peace, the quiet of recognition. The recognition that the people who had just arrived were not guests, not visitors, not friends of the man in the polo shirt. They were the machinery of consequence. Margot Selby emerged from the back office. She saw Vivian, saw Roland, saw the documents on the table. Her face performed the fastest emotional audit in the history of hospitality management. Confusion, recognition, disbelief, dread, in a sequence that lasted 3 seconds and aged her 5 years. Marshall stood. He did not make a speech, did not raise his voice, did not perform. He picked up the closing document, walked to the concierge desk where Margot, Chet, Ronan, and Janine had assembled, drawn by the gravity of what was obviously, unmistakably, irreversibly happening. He opened the document to the signature page and held it at reading height. The notary seal caught the chandelier light. My name is Marshall Ridley. I am the Chief Executive Officer of Ashford Ventures Holdings. This document confirms that I personally executed the acquisition of this hotel 72 hours ago. Every room, every floor, every position, every paycheck. He set the document on the concierge counter. I am not a trespasser. I am not a visitor. I own this building, and every one of you was notified. The silence that followed was not silence. It was the sound of 5 careers reaching terminal velocity. Ronan looked at Margot. Margot looked at the signature page. Chet looked at the floor. Janine looked at the back office doorway she had just walked through, the doorway behind which she had deleted the email that would have prevented everything that had happened in the last 2 hours. Deputy Keene, still standing near the front desk, looked at his body camera. The red light blinked. Roland Gaines stepped forward. He opened the laptop Vivian had placed on the table and pulled up the IT recovery log. At 4:18 p.m. on Wednesday, an acquisition notification was sent via the corporate email system to all 31 members of the Bellecourt staff. 23 employees confirmed receipt. The general manager's account shows a read receipt at 4:22 p.m. He turned the laptop so Margot could see the screen. The same notification was permanently deleted from the shared staff portal this morning at 10:52 a.m. during the active incident involving the CEO, by user J. Pratt, assistant manager. Janine made a sound, not a word. A sound. The sound of a person whose carefully constructed deletion had been undone by a server she did not know existed. "I was clearing old emails," Janine said. "It was routine maintenance. I clear the portal every—" "The deletion occurred 11 minutes after police arrived on scene," Roland continued. He did not acknowledge Janine's explanation. He did not need to. The server log timestamps are consistent with deliberate suppression of a material corporate communication during a period of active ownership transition. Under Section 11.4 of the Bellecourt Employee Handbook, which you signed upon hire, destruction of corporate records constitutes grounds for immediate termination for cause. He closed the laptop. "Ms. Pratt, your employment with the Bellecourt Hotel is terminated effective immediately. Don't go anywhere, because the consequences are not done, not even close. What happens to the rest of these employees will leave you speechless." Marshall turned to Deputy Keene. His voice remained level, the same register he had used for the entire 2-hour confrontation. No triumph, no satisfaction, factual. "Deputy, your body camera has recorded this entire interaction, including the moment hotel security physically grabbed my wrist and the 19 minutes you stood by without intervening. I'm filing a formal public records request for a copy of your footage under Arizona Revised Statute Section 39-121. I'm also filing a complaint with Scottsdale PD Internal Affairs regarding your failure to act when you witnessed a battery committed in your presence." Keene's face went through its own audit, slower than Margot's, heavier. I didn't see a battery." "Your body camera did. Timestamp 10:53 a.m. My wrist still has the marks." He held it up. The 4 finger-shaped bruises had darkened in the past hour. Visible, photographable, undeniable. "We'll let Internal Affairs review the footage." Keene's radio crackled. He did not answer it. Marshall turned to Chet. "Mr. Bowman, you are suspended immediately, pending an investigation into the physical contact that occurred at 10:53 a.m. The battery will be referred to Scottsdale PD for potential criminal charges under ARS Section 13-1203. You will also be the subject of an internal investigation for discriminatory enforcement of the hotel's access policies. Please surrender your badge and radio to Ms. Falk." Chet did not move for 5 seconds. Then he unclipped his radio, removed his badge, set both on the concierge counter with the careful precision of a man who knows he is being recorded and wants the footage to show compliance. Nina Falk collected them, placed them in a clear plastic bag, labeled it. Marshall turned to Margot. "Ms. Selby, you are suspended without pay, effective immediately, pending a full corporate investigation into discriminatory guest services practices, failure to implement acquisition transition protocols, and your role in the events of this morning." You read the acquisition memo at 4:22 p.m. on Wednesday. You knew this hotel had new ownership. You chose to act as though it didn't. And when I sat in your lobby as a black man with every legal right to be here, you called the police to have me removed from a building I own. Margot's mouth opened, closed, opened again. "I didn't know who you were." That's exactly the problem. You didn't need to know who I was. You needed to treat me the way you treat everyone else. You didn't, and your staff followed your example. He turned to Ronan. Mr. Duff, you fabricated a 45-minute wait at an empty restaurant and then immediately seated a white couple who arrived after me. You then presented a visitor registration form based on a policy that does not exist in the Bellecourt's Guest Services Manual. You will receive a formal written reprimand, be placed on probationary status for 12 months, and complete an anti-discrimination training program within 90 days. If you decline, your employment will be terminated. Ronan nodded. He did not speak. His clipboard was still in his hand, the one with the fabricated registration form. He set it on the counter, face down. Marshall returned to his chair, sat down, opened his phone, dialed a number. The call connected to a speakerphone in a conference room at Ashford Ventures' headquarters in Phoenix. 5 people were on the line, the emergency quorum of the board of directors. Patricia Langford, board chair, spoke first. Marshall, we have quorum. Summarize. Marshall summarized. Factual, chronological, no embellishment. The denied restaurant service, the fabricated policies, the police call, the wrist grab, the deleted memo, the documentation trail, the civilian witness. 3 minutes and 40 seconds. The board listened in the silence that money buys, the silence of people who understand that what they are hearing will cost them something and who are calculating exactly how much. Do you have documentation sufficient to support the personnel actions you've described? Patricia asked. Acquisition closing documents, server recovery logs showing memo deletion during the active incident, body cam reference number for the deputy's footage, a civilian witness with a recording, my contemporaneous notes covering 97 minutes of documented events and visible injuries consistent with battery. Proceed at your discretion. Legal will coordinate with Roland on the EEOC filing and the IA complaint. HR has authority for all personnel actions up to and including termination. The board supports you unanimously. The call ended. The lobby of the Bellecourt Hotel was quiet in the way that a courtroom is quiet after a verdict, not peaceful, but final. The chandelier still threw its prismatic light across the ceiling. The marble floor still gleamed. The posted access sign still hung behind the concierge desk, its words unchanged. The Bellecourt Hotel welcomes all visitors to our public lobby areas. The words had been true all morning. The people who worked beneath the sign had simply decided they didn't apply to everyone. Roland Gaines pulled Marshall aside, spoke quietly. I'll have the EEOC complaint drafted by Monday. Title II of the Civil Rights Act, 42 U.S.C. 2000A, and Section 1981 for the racial discrimination in contract services. I'm also filing a separate complaint with Arizona's Attorney General under the State Public Accommodations Statute. Timeline for the EEOC alone is 6 to 18 months. The AG complaint runs a parallel track. And Keene? Internal Affairs complaint goes to Scottsdale PD Monday morning. I'm requesting the body cam footage through the public records request simultaneously. If they stall, we escalate to the city manager. Investigations typically take 3 to 6 months. Keene stays on active duty during the investigation. That's standard. I know. Marshall's voice was quiet. Standard is the problem. At 12:14 p.m., 2 hours and 32 minutes after Marshall Ridley had walked through the revolving door of the Bellecourt Hotel, he stood, collected his portfolio, his notebook, his pen, and his cold coffee cup. He walked to the elevator bank. No one blocked his path. No one asked for his room key. No one demanded identification. He pressed the button. The doors opened. He stepped inside. On the way up, he pulled the portfolio from under his arm and opened it to the last page. Past the acquisition documents. Past the termination clauses. Past the signature page that had just rearranged the careers of 5 people. Tucked into the back flap was a photograph. Small. Creased at the corners. A woman in work scrub standing outside a commercial kitchen, squinting against the Arizona sun. Her name badge read, Eleanor. Her smile read 32 years of work in buildings where the people she cooked for never learned her last name. His mother. 32 years as a hotel cook in Tempe. She had fed thousands of guests in dining rooms she was never invited to sit in. She had entered through service doors so the customers wouldn't see the help. She had worked holidays, doubles, and split shifts in kitchens that were always 10 degrees hotter than the dining room, cooking food that cost more per plate than she earned per hour. She had never complained. Not once. Not about the work, not about the pay, not about the way the dining room staff looked through her as though the kitchen wall were made of glass and she were on the wrong side of it. She had died 4 years ago. In her will, she left him the photograph and a note. "Make sure they see us, baby. Not just in the kitchen, everywhere." He looked at her face. Then he closed the portfolio. The elevator doors opened on the 14th floor, the penthouse level, his floor, his building, his mother's legacy made concrete and steel and glass, standing 32 stories above a desert city where the sun never let you forget that everything casts a shadow. Downstairs, the lobby was emptying. Margot Selby sat in the back office, phone pressed to her ear, speaking to an attorney who was charging $400 an hour to explain that her options were limited. Chet Bowman stood in the parking lot, badgeless, radioless, waiting for an Uber. Janine Pratt sat in her car in the employee lot, staring at the steering wheel, trying to understand how a right click and a delete key had ended a career. Ronan Duff reorganized the host stand for the 4th time, his clipboard face down on the counter, the fabricated registration form curling at the edges. Deputy Keene sat in his cruiser in the hotel driveway, engine running, body camera still active. He had not filed a report, had not called dispatch, had not made a single entry about the confrontation he had just witnessed and failed to act on. The red light on his camera blinked steadily, a metronome counting the seconds until someone at Internal Affairs pressed play. And at the valet stand, Tomas Delgado wiped down the key cabinet, hung the rags to dry, and said nothing to anyone. He had known since Wednesday. He had watched the whole thing. And when it was over, when the machinery of consequence had done what Tomas could not do from a valet stand, he permitted himself one small gesture. He walked to the lobby, looked at the posted access sign, straightened it on its mount. It had been crooked for 6 months, tilted 2 degrees to the left, and no one had bothered to fix it. Now it hung level, the way it was supposed to. Monday morning. Marshall scheduled a full staff meeting. All 31 employees, 7 a.m., the hotel's 2nd floor conference room. He stood at the front in the same navy polo he had worn on Saturday. No suit, no tie, no performance of authority. "I bought this building because I believed in what it could be," he said. "What I saw on Saturday told me what it is. Those are 2 different things. Closing that gap is the work ahead, not mine alone. Yours." Alma Reyes raised her hand from the 3rd row. The same housekeeper who had approached him in the lobby on Saturday, feather duster in hand, apology in her posture. "Mr. Ridley, some of us tried to push back on those policies, the lobby monitoring, the ID checks, the way certain guests were treated differently. We were told to follow orders or find another job." "I know," Marshall said, "and that's why I'm here, not to punish, to understand. The people who created those policies are gone. The people who followed them under threat are not the same as the people who enforced them by choice. I know the difference." The meeting lasted 42 minutes. 17 employees spoke. 3 cried. 1, a night shift engineer named Ray Ortiz, who had worked at the Bella Court for 14 years, stood up and said, "I watched guests get treated differently in this lobby for years. I filed 2 complaints with the GM's office. Both disappeared. I stopped filing after that because I thought nobody was listening." "Someone is listening now," Marshall said. After the meeting, Alma approached him in the corridor. Her feather duster was gone. Her posture was different, not the apologetic hunch of Saturday, but something closer to vertical, something that looked like relief. "Mr. Ridley, I want you to know, on Saturday, when they sent me to check on you, I almost told you who you were." "You knew?" "Tomas told me Wednesday night, after the memo came through. He said someone important was coming, and we should just do our jobs and let whatever happened, happen. She paused. But I couldn't just watch. I tried to warn you. That's why I mentioned the 20-minute policy. I wanted you to understand what kind of place this was before they came for you. Marshall looked at her. 11 years at the Bella Court. 11 years of watching, documenting nothing, surviving. Alma, I want you to meet with Nina Falk this week. I want to understand the full scope of what happened here. Not just Saturday, but everything. The policies, the directives, the way people were treated. And I want to make sure the people who tried to push back are protected going forward. Will it matter? The question was not cynical. It was honest. The honest question of a woman who had watched 14 complaints disappear into a filing cabinet and never come out. It already matters, Marshall said. The question is whether it lasts. That afternoon, Tomas Delgado approached Marshall in the parking lot. The valet stand was closed for the day. Monday mornings were slow. Tomas wore his uniform, but had removed his name tag, as though the conversation he was about to have existed outside his job description. I read the memo, Tomas said. I knew who you were on Saturday. Why didn't you say anything? Tomas looked at the desert sky, squinted against the sun the way Marshall's mother squinted in the photograph. The same sun, the same state, the same light that makes everything visible and nothing comfortable. Because it wasn't my place to protect you from them. It was their job not to need protecting from. Marshall extended his hand. Tomas shook it. Neither said anything else. The handshake lasted 3 seconds, long enough to mean something, short enough not to perform it. After the meeting, Nina Falk's preliminary HR review of the Bella Court's guest complaint records revealed a pattern that would expand the scope of every investigation already in motion. 14 formal complaints filed over the past 3 years by Black and Latino guests, describing treatment identical to what Marshall had experienced. Denied restaurant seating, fabricated wait times, police called for trespassing in public areas, demands for identification not applied to white guests. All 14 complaints had been filed internally. All 14 had been marked, resolved, guest departed voluntarily. None had been investigated. None had been reported to corporate. None had been shared with any external agency. 14 times, the system had produced the same result. 14 times, the guest had been removed. 14 times, the paperwork had been filed in a way that made the removal look voluntary and the complaint look resolved. Marshall's was the 15th. The only difference was that the 15th guest owned the building. Nina flagged the pattern for Roland. Roland flagged it for the EEOC filing. The investigation timeline expanded from a single incident to a 3-year institutional practice, a shift that changed the legal framework from individual discrimination to systemic pattern or practice, which changed the potential remedies from personnel action to federal oversight. The gears of institutional accountability turn slowly. That is not a flaw. It is a design. The system was built by people who understood that speed favors the powerful, and that the only way to hold power accountable is to make the process so thorough, so documented, so procedurally airtight, that no amount of money or influence can shortcut the conclusion. It takes time. It costs patience. It costs sleep. It costs the specific kind of exhaustion that comes from knowing you are right and watching the system take months to agree with you. But the gears were turning. Monday evening, Marshall sat alone in the Bella Court penthouse. The desert sunset painted the room in shades of copper and amber. His portfolio lay open on the desk. His notebook, now 11 pages of entries, each one dated, timed, and written in the precise handwriting of a man who had been trained to keep records that could survive a courtroom, sat beside it. His phone buzzed. An email from Vivian, forwarded from the IT team, flagged urgent. During the server recovery process, IT had found an anomaly, an email that had not been part of the original acquisition communication chain. It had been sent to the Bella Court's general staff email address on Tuesday, the day before the acquisition memo, the day before Marshall's visit was announced. Sender, an external address, domain registered to a hospitality consulting firm called Ridgepoint Partners, LLC. Ridgepoint had done contract work for 6 Ashford-owned properties over the past 2 years. Staffing audits, operational assessments, transition consulting. Subject line, RE, Bellacourt. Transition, delay protocol. The email body was 4 words. He's coming. Stall him. No signature, no context, no explanation. 4 words that suggested someone outside the Bellacourt, someone with knowledge of Marshall's plans, someone connected to Ashford's own consulting network, had tipped off the hotel staff before the acquisition was even announced. Someone had known Marshall was coming, and someone had made sure the building was not ready for him. Marshall read the email 3 times. Then he forwarded it to Roland Gaines with a single line. Find out who sent this. He closed the laptop, looked out the window at the Scottsdale skyline. Low, wide, sun-bleached, the kind of city that spreads instead of rises. Somewhere in that spread, a consulting firm had a server with an outbox that contained 4 words and a motive he could not yet name. The investigation into who denied him service was over. The investigation into who set it up had just begun. He picked up his mother's photograph from the portfolio, held it in the light, her face squinting against the same Arizona sun that was now setting outside his window, her name badge, her kitchen scrubs, her smile, the smile of a woman who worked 32 years in a building where she was essential and invisible, necessary and unnamed. He set the photograph on the desk, leaned back in the chair that belonged to him, in the room that belonged to him, in the building that belonged to him. And for the first time all day, Marshall Ridley closed his eyes. Not in defeat, not in exhaustion, in preparation. Because the people who had denied him service were gone. But the person who had told them to, the person behind the 4-word email, behind the consulting firm, behind the delay protocol, was still out there. And Marshall Ridley had never, in 51 years of life, 12 years of military service, and a career built on seeing what rooms were telling you before anyone started talking. Marshall Ridley had never once walked away from a problem he could see but not yet name. The desert went dark. The lobby below was empty. The sign on the wall hung level. And somewhere, on a server he had not yet found, in an outbox he had not yet opened, the answer waited. 4 words on a screen. That is all it took to transform a discrimination case into a conspiracy investigation. He's coming. Stall him. Marshall Ridley sat in the Bellacourt penthouse on Monday night, laptop open, the email glowing on the display like a signal fire, visible only to the person who had built the tower it burned on. Outside, the Scottsdale skyline stretched flat and amber against the desert dark. Inside, the air conditioning hummed at 68 degrees. The temperature of a room calibrated for thinking, not comfort. He read the email a 4th time, then a 5th. Each reading produced the same 3 questions and the same 0 answers. Who at Ridgepoint Partners knew his schedule? How did they obtain it? And what did they gain by warning the Bellacourt staff before his arrival? He picked up his phone and called Roland Gaines. Roland answered on the first ring. The response time of a general counsel who had already been working this case for 6 hours and expected it to get worse before it got better. I need everything we have on Ridgepoint Partners, Marshall said. Every contract, every invoice, every point of contact between their firm and any Ashford property, and I need it cross-referenced with the Bellacourt's vendor records. I started pulling it an hour ago. Ridgepoint has done consulting work for 6 of our properties over the past 28 months. Staffing audits, operational assessments, transition consulting during acquisitions. Total billings, just under $900,000. Who's our primary contact there? A managing director named Soren Voss. He's been the relationship lead on every Ashford engagement. I've met him twice, once at the Tucson closing, once at the San Diego onboarding. Polished, connected. The kind of consultant who knows everyone's name and nobody's secrets, or pretends not to. The email was sent from a general Ridgepoint address, not a personal account. Can we trace it to a specific user? Not without a subpoena. Corporate email servers don't typically log individual user sessions on shared accounts unless the IT infrastructure is configured for it. we'd need Ridgepoint's cooperation or a court order. What's the fastest path to a court order? File a civil complaint alleging tortious interference with business operations. The email demonstrates that someone at Ridgepoint deliberately undermined an ownership transition by alerting hotel staff to the CEO's visit and instructing them to obstruct his access. That's interference with contractual relations under Arizona common law. And if we can tie it to the racial discrimination, it becomes a federal civil rights issue. Marshall was quiet for 10 seconds. The silence of calculation, not hesitation. File the complaint tomorrow. Name Ridgepoint Partners as a defendant. Include a discovery request for all email server logs, user access records, and internal communications related to the Bellecourt acquisition. Marshall, the moment we file, Ridgepoint's attorneys will move to quash. They'll argue attorney-client privilege, trade secrets, proprietary methodology. It'll take months to get past the motions. I know. Start the clock. He ended the call, closed the laptop. The email's 4 words lingered on the dark screen like a watermark, visible only when you knew where to look. Tuesday morning, 9:14 a.m. The offices of Ridgepoint Partners, LLC, occupied the 7th floor of a glass and sandstone building in Old Town Scottsdale, 12 minutes from the Bellecourt. The lobby featured a waterfall wall, abstract art that cost more than most of the consultants' annual salaries, and a receptionist who smiled the way hotel general managers smile. Warm on the surface, transactional underneath. Roland Gaines did not visit the office. He did not call. He filed the civil complaint in Maricopa County Superior Court at 9:02 a.m., and by 9:37 a.m., a process server was standing in Ridgepoint's lobby with a summons, a complaint, and a discovery request that was 14 pages long. The complaint alleged 3 causes of action. First, tortious interference with business relations based on the email instructing Bellecourt staff to obstruct the CEO's site visit. Second, aiding and abetting racial discrimination in a place of public accommodation, in violation of 42 U.S.C. Section 2000A, based on the theory that Ridgepoint's warning enabled the hotel staff to target Marshall specifically. Third, breach of fiduciary duty based on Ridgepoint's consulting contract with Ashford Ventures, which included a confidentiality clause prohibiting the disclosure of acquisition timelines, executive travel schedules, and ownership transition plans to third parties, including the very properties being acquired. The complaint named Ridgepoint Partners, LLC, as the primary defendant and reserved the right to add individual defendants as discovery revealed their identities. By 11 a.m., Ridgepoint's attorneys, a mid-size litigation firm in Phoenix called Harmon Kessler Strauss, had filed a motion to stay discovery pending a protective order hearing. The motion argued that the discovery request was overbroad, unduly burdensome, and designed to harass a legitimate consulting firm that has enjoyed a productive and mutually beneficial relationship with Ashford Ventures for over 2 years. Roland had expected the motion. He had written the discovery request to be broad precisely because the first round of discovery always gets narrowed by the court. You ask for everything so that when the judge cuts it in half, you still get what you need. The hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks out. The clock was running. While the lawyers filed motions, Marshall ran a parallel investigation inside Ashford Ventures. The question was not just who at Ridgepoint sent the email. The question was, who at Ashford gave Ridgepoint the information? Marshall's travel schedule, the date of his site visit, the fact that he intended to arrive anonymously. That information existed in exactly 4 places: Marshall's own calendar, Vivian Okafor's briefing notes, the executive travel coordinator's booking system, and the board-level acquisition timeline shared with the directors. Marshall called Vivian into his office at 1:15 p.m. on Tuesday. "I need an access audit on my travel calendar for the last 30 days. Every user who viewed it, every system that synced with it, every external integration that pulled data from it." Vivian set her tablet on the desk. "Already running. IT flagged something this morning. Your calendar shares a synchronization feed with the executive travel coordination platform. That platform has an API integration with 3 external vendors. One of them is Ridgepoint." The integration was standard. Consulting firms that managed acquisition transitions needed access to executive travel schedules to coordinate onboarding teams, staffing assessments, and property inspections. Ridgepoint had been granted read-only access to the travel platform 18 months ago during the San Diego acquisition, when their consultants needed to align their assessment schedule with Marshall's visit. The access had never been revoked. For 18 months, Ridgepoint Partners had been able to see when and where the CEO of Ashford Ventures was traveling, including the Saturday visit to the Bellecourt. "Shut down the integration," Marshall said. "Revoke all external vendor access to the travel platform, and pull the API access logs. I want to know exactly when Ridgepoint queried my schedule and what data they pulled." The API logs arrived by 4 p.m. They showed that someone at Ridgepoint had accessed Marshall's travel calendar 6 times in the past 90 days. The most recent access was Monday of the previous week, 5 days before the Bellecourt acquisition closed, 4 days before the staff notification memo, and 6 days before Marshall's Saturday visit. The query had returned 3 data points: destination, Scottsdale; property name, Bellecourt Hotel; and scheduled arrival date, Saturday. No flight information. Marshall had driven. No hotel reservation. He had planned to inspect the property and return to Phoenix the same day. Just enough information to send a 4-word email to the people who would be waiting for him. Marshall forwarded the API logs to Roland with a single line: "Add this to the discovery file." That evening, Marshall drove to the Bellecourt, not for an inspection, for a conversation. He found Alma Reyes finishing her shift in the second-floor linen closet, folding towels with the practiced efficiency of a woman who had folded approximately 1.4 million towels in 11 years and could do it in her sleep. "Alma, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest." She set down the towel. "I've been honest with you since Saturday. I'm not planning to stop." "The lobby monitoring policy, the one where you were sent to check on people who'd been there more than 20 minutes. When it started 2 years ago, did it come from Margot alone? Or was there someone outside the hotel involved?" Alma was quiet for a long time. The linen closet smelled like industrial detergent and warm cotton, the smell of work that nobody notices until it stops being done. "There was a man," she said finally. "He came every few months. Suit, nice watch. Talked to Margot in her office for an hour, sometimes 2. After his visits, new policies would appear. The lobby thing. The ID checks. The way Ronan was told to handle the restaurant." She paused. "He never introduced himself to staff. Margot called him our consultant. I saw his name on a visitor log once. Voss. Something Voss. Soren Voss, the managing director of Ridgepoint Partners. The man whose email account had sent the 4-word warning. The man who had been visiting the Bellecourt every few months for 2 years, meeting privately with the general manager, and leaving behind policies designed to sort guests by appearance. Did anyone else know about his visits? Tomas probably saw him come and go. The front desk would have logged him. But nobody asked questions. Margot ran this place like it was hers. Asking questions was how you got your shifts cut. Marshall thanked her, left the linen closet, drove back to Phoenix in the dark, headlights cutting through the desert like the beams of Scottsdale PD flashlights cutting through a lobby, illuminating only what they were pointed at, leaving everything else in shadow. He called Roland from the car. Voss was visiting the Bellecourt in person, regularly, for 2 years. Staff saw him. Visitor logs will have records. This wasn't a remote consulting engagement. He was on site, meeting with Margot, and the discriminatory policies appeared after his visits. Roland's voice tightened. That changes the civil complaint. If Voss was actively involved in developing the discriminatory policies, Ridgepoint isn't just an accessory. They're a co-architect. That's direct liability under Section 1981, conspiracy to discriminate. Amend the complaint. I'll have it filed by morning. The amended complaint added Soren Voss as an individual defendant and introduced a new cause of action: civil conspiracy to deprive individuals of equal enjoyment of public accommodations, in violation of 42 U.S.C. Section 1985(3). The conspiracy theory alleged that Voss and Margot had worked together to develop and implement a guest sorting system that targeted Black and Latino visitors for exclusion, and that Ridgepoint had been compensated for this work through consulting fees paid by the very company whose CEO would eventually become the system's most prominent target. The Ridgepoint thread was one investigation. The Bellecourt's internal pattern was another, and the two were about to intersect in a way that neither Marshall nor his legal team had anticipated. Nina Falk had spent Monday and Tuesday conducting the HR review that Marshall had ordered, a comprehensive audit of the Bellecourt's guest complaint records, personnel files, and internal communications for the past 3 years. What she found was not a collection of isolated incidents. It was a system. The 14 guest complaints Marshall had already been told about were the surface. Beneath them, Nina uncovered a structure of policies, directives, and informal practices that had turned the Bellecourt into a sorting machine, a machine that classified guests and visitors by appearance and applied different rules depending on the classification. The sorting had 3 tiers. Tier 1. White guests. Standard service, immediate seating, no ID verification, no lobby monitoring. Complaints handled within 24 hours. Loyalty program enrollment offered proactively. Tier 2. Non-white guests with visible indicators of wealth. Cautious service. Reservation confirmation requested. Occasionally seated with a brief delay. Complaints handled within 48 hours. Loyalty program enrollment offered upon request. Tier 3. Non-white visitors without visible indicators of wealth. Obstructed service. Fabricated wait times. ID verification demanded. Lobby monitoring initiated after 20 minutes. Police called if the visitor did not leave voluntarily. Complaints filed as resolved, guest departed. No follow-up. The tiers were not written in any policy document. They were not discussed in staff meetings. They were not part of any training manual. They existed in the space between what was said and what was done, communicated through tone, through example, through the specific gravity of a general manager who treated some guests like guests and others like trespassers. Margot Selby had not invented racial profiling. She had institutionalized it, given it a schedule, a procedure, a paper trail designed to look like customer service while functioning as exclusion. Nina documented the pattern in a 42-page report. She flagged 3 employees, all housekeepers, who had filed internal complaints about the lobby monitoring policy and been told to follow the GM's directive or seek employment elsewhere. 2 of the 3 had quit within 6 months. The third, Alma Reyes, had stayed, absorbed the directive, and carried out the monitoring while quietly hating every second of it. The report went to Roland on Wednesday morning. Roland added it to the EEOC filing. The complaint, which had started as a single incident of discrimination against Marshall Ridley, was now a pattern or practice case spanning 3 years, a legal distinction that transformed the potential remedies from individual relief to systemic reform. An EEOC pattern or practice investigation could take 18 to 24 months. It could result in a consent decree, a court-supervised agreement requiring the hotel to implement specific anti-discrimination measures, submit to regular audits, and report compliance to a federal monitor. Or it could result in nothing. The system's capacity for accountability was matched only by its capacity for delay. The gears were turning, slowly, as designed. This is where most stories end. The hero wins, the villains lose, the credits roll. But this story is not about winning. It is about what happens when winning takes years. And the people who harmed you fight back with everything they have. Wednesday afternoon. Margot Selby's attorney, a labor and employment specialist named Gretchen Yates, filed a response to the suspension with Ashford Ventures' HR department. The response was 17 pages long and made 3 arguments. First, that Margot's actions on Saturday were consistent with her established duties as general manager and reflected reasonable security judgments based on the information available to her. She had received a corporate memo about new ownership, but had not been informed that the CEO would visit personally, anonymously, or without advance coordination. Her decision to ask an unidentified man to leave the lobby was, by this argument, standard operational discretion, not discrimination. Second, that Marshall Ridley had provoked the confrontation by deliberately concealing his identity, refusing to identify his purpose, and remaining in the lobby after being asked to leave. By this argument, the entire incident was a manufactured test designed to create grounds for personnel action, a common tactic, Gretchen wrote, employed by corporate raiders who seek to replace existing management with loyalists during hostile transitions. Third, and this was the argument that landed hardest, that the suspension was retaliatory. Margot had been the Bellecourt's general manager for 6 years, with no formal disciplinary action. Her performance reviews were satisfactory. Her guest satisfaction scores, while declining, were within industry norms. The suspension, Gretchen argued, was not a response to discrimination. It was a response to Margot's failure to recognize a CEO who had chosen to be unrecognizable, and punishing an employee for failing to identify a deliberately disguised executive was not a legitimate basis for suspension. The response was smart. It was legally sophisticated. And it contained just enough truth to be dangerous. Marshall had concealed his identity. He had refused to explain his purpose. He had remained in the lobby after being asked to leave. These were facts, undeniable, documented, recorded on body cam. The question was whether those facts justified the treatment he received, or whether the treatment he received would have been the same regardless of who he was, which meant regardless of what he looked like. The concealment defense had a surface appeal that Rowland knew would resonate with certain jurors. The narrative was simple. A CEO plays dress down, walks into his own hotel without telling anyone, refuses to explain himself, and then punishes the staff for not recognizing him. Framed that way, Marshall was not the victim. He was the instigator. A rich man playing games with working people's livelihoods. Gretchen Yates knew how to frame it that way. She had done it in her response. She would do it again in mediation, in arbitration, in front of a jury if it came to that. And the framing was effective because it contained a kernel of legitimate grievance. Employees should not be punished for failing to recognize a CEO who chose to be anonymous. But the framing collapsed the moment you asked one question. Would Margot have called the police on a white man in khakis reading documents in the lobby? The answer was on the body cam. At 10:31 a.m., a white man in a golf shirt had stood in the same lobby without a room key. Margot had offered him directions to the spa. She had not asked for ID. She had not mentioned the 20-minute policy. She had not called the police. The concealment defense required the court to believe that Margot's decision to call police was based on Marshall's behavior, his refusal to explain himself, his refusal to leave. But the body cam showed that identical behavior from a white visitor produced a fundamentally different response. Same lobby, same time, same GM, different outcome. The only variable was the person. That was the case. Not the acquisition documents, not the corporate authority, not the CEO title. The case was a white man getting spa directions and a black man getting a police escort in the same hour from the same woman in the same building. Rowland read the response in his office at 4:30 p.m. on Wednesday. Called Marshall at 4:32. Her lawyer is good, Rowland said. She's framing this as a management dispute, not a civil rights case. If we're not careful, the narrative shifts from they discriminated against a black man to a CEO played gotcha with his own employees. Is she wrong? The question surprised Rowland. Not because it was asked. Marshall asked uncomfortable questions the way other people asked for coffee, but because it contained a genuine uncertainty, a crack in the certainty that had sustained him through the entire confrontation. She's wrong about the discrimination, Rowland said carefully. Your race determined how you were treated. The restaurant differential, the lobby monitoring, the black family being checked at the elevator, that's not operational discretion. That's a pattern. But she's right that concealing your identity created a situation where the staff couldn't know who they were dealing with. A jury might ask why you didn't just show them the acquisition documents at the beginning. Because the documents shouldn't matter. That's the point. I shouldn't need to prove I own the building to be treated like a human being in the lobby. The question isn't whether they would have treated me differently if they knew I was the CEO. The question is why they treated me the way they did when they thought I was nobody. The silence on the line lasted 6 seconds. That's the argument, Roland said. That's the one that wins. Thursday. 2 developments arrived simultaneously, the way trouble always does. In pairs, each one making the other worse. Development 1. Deputy Arlo Keene's body camera footage was released to Ashford Ventures through the public records request filed under ARS Section 39-121. The footage was 97 minutes long. It began with Keene's arrival at the Bellecourt and ended with his departure after the board call. Roland's team spent Thursday afternoon reviewing every frame, tagging timestamps, and cataloging the moments that mattered. The footage confirmed everything Marshall had documented. The wrist grab at 10:53 a.m., visible, clear. Chet's fingers wrapping around Marshall's left wrist, the pen falling to the marble floor. Marshall's stillness. Keene's half-step forward and full stop, the 19 minutes of inaction that followed. Margot's statement to Keene, "I don't care about his ID. I want him out of my lobby." Audible at a volume that suggested she had forgotten, or did not care, that the deputy's chest-mounted camera was recording. The footage also captured something Marshall had not seen from his seated position. At 10:49 a.m., while Keene was speaking to Margot at the front desk, Chet Bowman had walked to the lobby entrance and repositioned a velvet rope stanchion across the path between the revolving door and the elevator bank, creating a physical barrier that did not exist in the Bellecourt's standard lobby configuration. The stanchion had been placed after Marshall arrived and removed after the confrontation ended. It appeared in no security protocol. It was referenced in no policy manual. It was a barrier built for one person, to obstruct one path during one morning. But the body cam revealed something else, something smaller, quieter, and in some ways more damaging than the wrist grab or the stanchion. At 10:31 a.m., during the period when Marshall was seated in the lobby chair reading his portfolio, the camera captured Margot approaching a white guest near the elevator. The guest, a man in his 60s, wearing a golf shirt and no visible room key, was standing in the lobby, scrolling his phone, clearly not a registered guest. Margot smiled at him, asked if he needed help, offered directions to the spa, did not ask for identification, did not ask for a room key, did not mention the 20-minute policy, did not summon security. The interaction lasted 22 seconds. It was captured in full audio, and it destroyed the foundational argument of Margot's defense, the argument that her treatment of Marshall was based on operational discretion rather than race. Because here, on her own deputy's body cam, was Margot Selby applying operational discretion to a white man in the same lobby at the same time, and arriving at a different conclusion. One man got directions to the spa. The other got a phone call to the police. Roland flagged both the stanchion placement and the spa interaction for the EEOC complaint. In pattern or practice cases, small details are the mortar between the bricks. Each one alone means nothing. Together, they build a wall. Development 2. Scottsdale. PD Internal Affairs acknowledged receipt of the formal complaint against Deputy Keene and assigned it case number IA-2024-0157. The acknowledgement letter was 2 paragraphs long and contained the following language. The Scottsdale Police Department takes all complaints against officers seriously and is committed to a thorough, impartial investigation. Deputy Keene will remain on active duty during the investigation, consistent with department policy. The estimated timeline for completion is 90 to 180 days. You will be notified of the outcome in writing. 90 to 180 days. 3 to 6 months. Active duty during the investigation. No suspension. No administrative leave. No change in assignment. A man who had watched a battery occur and done nothing would continue carrying a badge and a body camera for up to 6 months, while a committee decided whether watching a battery occur and doing nothing was a problem. Marshall read the letter in his office, set it on the desk next to the body cam footage timestamps. 2 documents, one showing what happened, the other showing how long it would take for anyone to care. He had expected this. He had told Roland on Saturday, "Standard is the problem." And the standard was this: the machinery of accountability operates at a speed designed to exhaust the people seeking it. You file a complaint. You wait. You provide documentation. You wait. You answer follow-up questions. You wait. And while you wait, the person you complained about continues doing the job they were doing when they harmed you, collecting the paycheck they were collecting when they harmed you, wearing the badge they were wearing when they harmed you. It is not broken. It is built. 3 weeks passed. The discovery hearing in the Ridgepoint case was held on a Wednesday morning in Maricopa County Superior Court. Courtroom 4B, Judge Sandra Huerta presiding. Roland argued that the discovery request was narrowly tailored to communications related to the Bellecourt transition. Ridgepoint's attorneys argued that the request was a fishing expedition designed to harass a reputable consulting firm. Judge Huerta split the difference. She ordered Ridgepoint to produce all emails sent from or received by the general corporate email account during the 72-hour window surrounding the Bellecourt acquisition closing, Tuesday through Thursday of the relevant week. She denied the broader request for 18 months of internal communications, ruling it overbroad. She also denied Ridgepoint's motion to stay discovery entirely, finding that the email's 4 words, "He's coming, stall him," established sufficient grounds for a targeted investigation. The ruling was partial. It gave Roland a window, 72 hours of email traffic, but not the full archive he had wanted. It was enough to see who sent the email. It might not be enough to see why. Ridgepoint had 14 days to comply. Their attorneys immediately signaled they would seek an interlocutory appeal. The clock kept running. While the Ridgepoint litigation crawled through the courts, the internal consequences at the Bellecourt continued to unfold, not with the clean finality of a story, but with the messy incrementalism of a system correcting itself one gear at a time. Chet Bowman's suspension was extended from 30 days to indefinite after the bodycam footage review revealed the stanchion repositioning, an action that, combined with the wrist grab, elevated the investigation from a single battery incident to a pattern of deliberate physical obstruction targeting a specific individual. The Scottsdale City Attorney's Office reviewed the footage independently and declined to file criminal battery charges, citing insufficient evidence of intent to cause physical harm. The wrist grab, in their assessment, was brief, did not result in significant injury, and occurred in the context of a security dispute, a characterization that ignored the bruises Marshall had photographed and submitted as evidence. Roland challenged the declination in a letter to the city attorney that was 3 pages long and contained 14 citations. The letter argued that the bodycam footage showed a deliberate grasping motion, not an incidental touch, and that the bruises documented in photographs taken 2 hours after the incident constituted evidence of harm. The city attorney's office responded with a 1-paragraph acknowledgement that did not address any of the 14 citations. The response said, "We appreciate your concerns and have carefully reviewed the submitted materials. Our office stands by its charging decision." 9 words of substance, 14 citations unanswered. The mathematics of institutional indifference, always lopsided, always in the same direction. Chet hired an attorney of his own. The attorney filed a wrongful suspension grievance with the Arizona Department of Economic Security, arguing that Chet's indefinite suspension without a criminal charge constituted a de facto termination without due process. The grievance was pending. Chet was collecting unemployment benefits while the company that employed him, Ashford Ventures, was simultaneously defending the EEOC complaint he had triggered, the IA investigation he had caused, and the civil complaint his behavior had connected to a consulting firm conspiracy. No criminal charges, an administrative investigation, a wrongful suspension grievance, an unemployment claim, 4 simultaneous proceedings, each operating on a different timeline, each costing money that could have been spent on hotel guests instead of hotel lawyers. The total legal expenditure related to a single Saturday morning in a single hotel lobby was approaching $600,000 and rising. This is what accountability costs. Not the cost of doing the right thing, the cost of having done the wrong thing for so long that correcting it requires an army of attorneys, a mountain of paperwork, and a timeline measured in fiscal quarters instead of human patience. Margot Selby's suspension remained in effect pending the completion of Nina Falk's HR investigation. Margot's attorney, Gretchen Yates, filed a formal grievance with Arizona's Department of Labor, alleging that the suspension constituted wrongful retaliation for Margot's legitimate management decisions. The grievance triggered a parallel investigation. Now Marshall's company was being investigated by the state while simultaneously investigating its own employee. The irony was not lost on Rowland, who described the situation in a Friday briefing as the legal equivalent of being attacked by a bear while filling out the paperwork to report a bear attack. Ronan Duff completed his written reprimand acknowledgement and enrolled in the required anti-discrimination training, a 12-hour online course administered by an outside vendor. He remained on probationary status. His performance would be reviewed quarterly for 12 months. He continued working the front desk, greeting guests with the same mannequin smile, seating them in the same restaurant, operating under the same posted policy that now meant what it had always said. Janine Pratt's termination was contested through the Hotel Workers Union. Her representative, a labor organizer named Cal Meredith, argued that the memo deletion was an inadvertent act committed under extreme workplace stress, and that termination was disproportionate to the offense. The arbitration hearing was scheduled for 4 months out. In the meantime, Janine was unemployed, unable to collect unemployment benefits due to the for-cause termination, and considering a separate wrongful termination lawsuit against Ashford Ventures. The lawsuit had not yet been filed. Cal Meredith was still evaluating the merits. Each thread pulled in a different direction. Each thread operated on a different timeline. Each thread cost money, attention, and the specific kind of institutional patience that most people, most victims, most complainants, most human beings who have been grabbed by the wrist in a lobby they owned, do not have the resources to sustain. Marshall had the resources. That was the difference between his case and the 14 that came before it. He could afford Roland Gaines at $650 an hour. He could afford Nina Falk's 42-page report. He could afford the IT forensics, the API log analysis, the discovery motions, and the interlocutory appeal responses. He could afford to wait 6 months for an IA investigation and 18 months for an EEOC complaint and 4 months for an arbitration hearing, and an indefinite period for a civil lawsuit against a consulting firm whose attorneys billed at rates comparable to his own. The 14 guests before him could not. They had departed voluntarily. They had been filed as resolved, and the machine had continued sorting. If this story makes you feel something, share it. Not because it ends well, but because it doesn't end. Not yet. Not until the people who built this system are held accountable by the system that replaced it. 6 weeks after the Saturday confrontation, the Ridgepoint discovery deadline arrived. Ridgepoint's attorneys had not filed the interlocutory appeal. Instead, they produced a heavily redacted set of email records, 43 pages, most of them routine administrative correspondence about staffing schedules and transition timelines. But page 31 was different. Page 31 was the email. Unredacted. Sender field visible for the first time. The email had been sent from the account of Soren Voss. The managing director Rowland had identified as the primary Ridgepoint contact. But the metadata told a different story. The email's originating IP address did not match Ridgepoint's office network. It matched a residential IP in Paradise Valley, a wealthy enclave north of Scottsdale, 20 minutes from the Bellacourt. Rowland ran the IP against public records. The address was registered to a residential internet account in the name of Margot Selby. The email had not been sent by Ridgepoint. It had been sent through Ridgepoint's system by someone using Margot Selby's home network, someone who had access to the consulting firm's corporate email and the GM's home Wi-Fi. The possibilities narrowed quickly. Either Margot had sent the email herself using credentials she should not have possessed, or someone at her residence had sent it using a device connected to her network, or someone had spoofed her IP, technically possible but improbable for a 4-word email with no financial payload. Rowland called Marshall at 8:47 a.m. The email came from Margot's home network. Marshall was silent for 5 seconds. How does a hotel general manager have access to a consulting firm's email system? That's the question, and I may already have part of the answer. Roland paused. The pause of a lawyer who has found something that changes the shape of the case and is deciding how to deliver it. During the discovery production, Ridgepoint included a set of administrative records, user account creation logs. I almost missed it. Page 38. There's a record showing that a guest access account was created on Ridgepoint's email server 14 months ago. Username mselby-bellacourt. The account was provisioned by the system administrator at the request of, and I'm reading this directly from the log, S. Voss, Managing Director, per Client Relationship Management Protocol. Client Relationship Management Protocol. That's their euphemism. What it means in practice is that Voss gave Margot a login to the consulting firm's email system. She could read internal Ridgepoint communications. She could send emails from a Ridgepoint address. And critically, she could monitor the acquisition timeline in real time, because Ridgepoint's transition team used the email system to coordinate all property assessments, including scheduling notes that referenced the CEO's travel calendar. So she saw the calendar entries. She saw everything: the acquisition closing date, the staff memo timeline, your planned visit. She had 14 months of access to information that should have been confidential to the consulting engagement, information that Ashford was paying Ridgepoint to protect. The picture was not just forming now. It was complete. Voss had given Margot access to Ridgepoint's system. Through that access, Margot had monitored Marshall's acquisition timeline. When she learned that the CEO was planning an anonymous site visit, she, or Voss, using credentials that originated from her network, had sent the forward email to the Bellacourt staff account. "He's coming. Stall him." The email was designed to ensure that Marshall's visit would be obstructed before he could observe the hotel's actual operating practices. The 3-tiered sorting system, the fabricated policies, the discriminatory guest treatment that Ridgepoint had been paid to audit and had systematically ignored. It was not a conspiracy born of hatred. It was a conspiracy born of self-preservation. Margot wanted to keep her job. Voss wanted to keep his contract. And between them, they had built a communications channel that allowed the GM of a hotel to see inside the corporate headquarters of the company that owned it. A channel that gave the Fox a live feed of the henhouse security cameras. I'm adding a supplemental discovery request for Ridgepoint's user access logs, specifically any credentials issued to non-employees, and I'm amending the civil complaint to add the conspiracy claim. Do it. And Roland, pull every staffing audit Ridgepoint conducted for our properties. Every one. I want to know if they flagged a single instance of discriminatory guest treatment at any Ashford property during their entire 28-month engagement. Roland's answer came before he checked. He already knew. They didn't. Not one. $900,000, 28 months, 6 properties, and they didn't find what a man in a polo shirt found in 90 minutes. They weren't looking. That's the point. They were being paid to look at staffing ratios and maintenance budgets, not at who gets seated first in the restaurant. Then we need auditors who look at everything, including the restaurants. Roland filed the amended complaint that afternoon. The conspiracy cause of action under 42 U.S.C. Section 19853 alleged that Voss and Margot had worked together to develop and implement a guest sorting system that targeted Black and Latino visitors for exclusion, and that Ridgepoint had been compensated for this work through consulting fees paid by the very company whose CEO would eventually become the system's most prominent target. The Ridgepoint thread was one investigation. The Bellacourt's internal pattern was another. The settlement conference took place 3 weeks later, 11 weeks after the Saturday confrontation, in a neutral conference room at a mediation center in downtown Phoenix. Present: Marshall, Roland, and Vivian for Ashford Ventures, Gretchen Yates for Margot Selby, 2 partners from Harmon Kessler Strauss for Ridgepoint, and Soren Voss, seated at the end of the table, looking like a man who had run out of rooms to retreat to. Marshall had not seen Voss before this moment. He studied him the way he studied buildings, from the outside in, mid-50s, silver at the temples, tailored charcoal suit, cufflinks that cost more than Alma Reyes earned in a week. The polished veneer of a man whose career had been built on being in rooms where decisions were made and ensuring that he was never the one held responsible for them. Voss did not look at Marshall. He looked at the table, at his attorneys, at the water glass he turned in slow circles but never drank from. He did not look at the man whose wrist had been grabbed in the lobby of a hotel that Voss had helped transform into a sorting machine. The mediation began at 9 a.m. The mediator, a retired federal magistrate named Irwin Cole, opened by establishing ground rules. No interruptions, no personal attacks. Each party would have the opportunity to present their position. The goal was resolution, not vindication. Roland presented Ashford's case first. He laid out the timeline, the acquisition, the memo, the Saturday confrontation, the deleted email, the IP trace, the API logs, Alma's statement about Voss's visits, the visitor logs confirming them. He presented Nina's 42-page report documenting 3 years of systematic discrimination. He presented the body cam footage on a laptop, the wrist grab, the stanchion repositioning, Margot's statement, "I don't care about his ID, I want him out of my lobby." The footage played for 97 seconds. No one in the room spoke during it. Voss's water glass stopped turning. Gretchen Yates presented Margot's position, the concealment defense, the manufactured test theory, the retaliation claim. She was precise, professional, and thorough, the kind of attorney who makes bad facts sound reasonable by surrounding them with procedure. Ridgepoint's attorneys presented a minimalist defense. The email was sent from a shared corporate account. The IP trace was circumstantial. The visitor logs showed routine consulting visits consistent with the scope of the engagement. They characterized the API calendar access as standard operating procedure for transition consulting. Then Marshall spoke. He had not planned to. Roland had advised against it. Let the lawyers talk. That's what we're paying for. But when the Ridgepoint attorneys finished their presentation and the room shifted toward negotiation, Marshall raised his hand. "I'd like to say something, not as a legal argument, as a statement of fact." The mediator nodded. "Go ahead, Mr. Ridley." Marshall looked at Margot, then at Voss, then at the table between them. The same kind of polished conference table that existed in every building he owned, every deal he closed, every room where power negotiated with power, and the people who were harmed waited outside. On Saturday, I walked into a lobby that I own. I was wearing a polo shirt and khakis. I was carrying a portfolio and a cup of coffee. I did not announce myself. I did not display credentials. I did not perform wealth or status or authority. I looked like what I looked like. A black man in a hotel lobby. He paused. Within 16 minutes, I was told I did not belong. Within 40 minutes, the police were called. Within 66 minutes, I was physically grabbed by the wrist by a man who outweighed me by 90 pounds, while a deputy watched and did nothing. All of this was recorded. All of it was documented. And all of it happened because the people in that building made an assumption about me based on what I looked like, and then enforced that assumption with policy, with authority, and with force. He looked at Voss. "You helped build the system that made that possible. You visited that hotel. You met with the general manager. You helped design policies that turned the lobby into a checkpoint. And when you learned I was coming, you sent a 4-word email to make sure the checkpoint worked." Voss's attorney objected. The mediator overruled. Marshall continued. "I am not here because I was insulted. I have been insulted before. I am here because 14 people before me were treated the same way, and none of them had the resources to sit in this room. They departed voluntarily. They were filed as resolved, and the system you built kept running." He sat back, said nothing else. The negotiation lasted 6 hours. The terms, when they settled, looked like this. Ridgepoint Partners agreed to terminate its consulting relationship with Ashford Ventures, forfeit all outstanding invoices, approximately $140,000, and submit to an independent audit of all work performed for Ashford Properties. Soren Voss resigned from Ridgepoint, effective immediately. The firm agreed to cooperate with any federal investigation arising from the EEOC complaint, including providing unredacted email records and user access logs. No admission of wrongdoing, no public statement. Margot Selby agreed to resign from the Bellecourt effective immediately, in exchange for a neutral reference letter and 3 months' severance. She withdrew her wrongful retaliation grievance with the Department of Labor. She agreed not to seek employment at any Ashford-affiliated property for 5 years. She retained the right to pursue her own EEOC cross-complaint, the one alleging that Marshall's concealment of his identity constituted entrapment, but Rowland assessed the cross-complaint's chances at somewhere between slim and theatrical. No admission of wrongdoing, no public statement. The phrase appeared in both agreements. It was the language of institutional settlement, the words that allow both sides to walk away without the weight of a verdict. The words that let Margot Selby describe herself as someone who resigned rather than someone who was removed. The words that let Ridgepoint describe the termination as a business decision rather than a consequence. The words that let the system file the outcome as resolved. Marshall signed both agreements. He did not feel victorious. He felt the specific weight of a partial result, the weight of knowing that the people who had harmed him would face professional consequences but not legal ones, administrative discipline but not criminal charges, financial costs, but not the kind of accountability that changes behavior in the people who were not in the room. The machine had been examined. Some of its operators had been removed. But the machine itself, the assumptions, the reflexes, the 3-tiered sorting system that lived in the space between policy and practice, the machine was still running, in other lobbies, in other hotels, in other buildings where the sign said welcome, and the people said something else. 3 months after the Saturday confrontation, the EEOC investigation was ongoing. An investigator named Denise Huang had been assigned to the case. She had conducted on-site interviews with 11 current and former Bellecourt employees, reviewed Nina Falk's 42-page report, and requested Marshall's contemporaneous notes, the body cam footage, and Felix Yoon's restaurant recording. The investigation was proceeding. The timeline was indefinite. The EEOC's average case processing time in the Phoenix District Office was 312 days. Marshall's case, now a pattern or practice complaint involving 3 years of documented discrimination, a corporate conspiracy, and a settlement that had removed 2 of the principal actors, was not average. It could take longer, it could take shorter. It could result in a consent decree, a right to sue letter, a conciliation agreement, or a determination of no cause. The possibilities were wide. The certainty was narrow. Deputy Keene's IA investigation reached its conclusion at the 4-month mark. The finding was sustained, meaning Internal Affairs determined that Keene had violated department policy by failing to intervene when he witnessed the battery. The recommended discipline was a written reprimand and mandatory retraining on intervention obligations under Scottsdale PD General Order 4.7. A written reprimand, not a suspension, not a demotion, not a termination. A piece of paper in a personnel file that would be reviewed during his next promotion cycle and might affect the outcome. A piece of paper that cost Keene nothing he could feel. The IA investigator's report, 31 pages obtained by Rowland through a follow-up public records request, contained a passage that Marshall read 3 times. Deputy Keene stated during his investigative interview that he observed Mr. Bowman make physical contact with Mr. Ridley's wrist, but characterized the contact as brief and incidental to a security interaction. Deputy Keene further stated that he was in the process of assessing the situation when the contact was released. He acknowledged that he did not issue any verbal instruction to Mr. Bowman during or after the contact. The investigative panel finds that Deputy Keene's characterization of the contact as incidental is inconsistent with the body cam footage, which shows a deliberate grasping motion lasting approximately 4 seconds. The panel further finds that Deputy Keene's failure to intervene or document the contact at the scene constitutes a violation of General Order 4.7, Section C, which requires officers to take appropriate action to prevent the continuation of any witnessed use of force that appears excessive or unauthorized. appears excessive or unauthorized. The language of a system describing itself, carefully, precisely, with enough qualifiers to leave room for the next deputy who watches a battery and calls it incidental. Felix Yoon, the litigation support analyst from room 412 who had recorded the restaurant discrimination, had filed his own complaint with the Arizona Attorney General's office. His complaint alleged that the Bellecourt's restaurant practices constituted a violation of Arizona's Public Accommodation Statute, ARS Section 41-1442, which prohibits discrimination in places of public accommodation based on race, color, or national origin. Felix's phone recording, 94 seconds of unedited video showing Ronan Duff denying Marshall a table and then immediately seating a white couple, had been submitted as supporting evidence. The AG's office acknowledged receipt and assigned the complaint to the Civil Rights Division. Investigation timeline, 6 to 12 months. Another clock, another gear, another piece of a machine that moved at the speed of bureaucracy while the people it was supposed to protect moved at the speed of life. Felix had also done something Marshall had not asked for and could not have expected. He had posted a written account of what he witnessed, without naming Marshall, the hotel, or the city, on a professional legal forum. The post described the restaurant incident, the lobby confrontation, the wrist grab, and the deputy's inaction. Within 72 hours, it had been viewed 14,000 times and generated 311 comments, including 7 from civil rights attorneys offering pro bono consultation and 2 from journalists requesting permission to follow up. Felix had not accepted the journalists' requests. He had forwarded them to Roland. Roland had filed them. The story was not ready for the press, not because it wasn't true, but because the legal proceedings were still in motion, and premature publicity could compromise the EEOC investigation, the IA review, and the Ridgepoint civil complaint. The truth would come out, but it would come out on a timeline that the law controlled, not the internet. Marshall read the IA finding in Roland's office, set it on the desk, looked at the window. Is that all? That's standard for a first sustained finding with no prior disciplinary history. The union would have grieved anything stronger. He watched a man grab my wrist and did nothing. I know. And the system's response to that is a written reprimand and an 8-hour training course. That's what the system considers proportional. And if I hadn't owned the building, if I'd been one of the 14 before me, if I'd departed voluntarily and been filed as resolved. Roland did not answer. The question did not require an answer. It required a different system. And different systems are not built in conference rooms. They are built in the space between complaint and consequence, a space measured in years, not weeks. Janine Pratt's arbitration hearing was held on a Thursday in a rented conference room at a hotel that was not the Bellecourt. The irony was noted by everyone present and mentioned by no one. Cal Meredith, the union representative, presented Janine's case for 90 minutes. The deletion was inadvertent. The stress was extreme. The termination was disproportionate. Janine had 3 years of satisfactory performance reviews. She had no prior disciplinary history. The memo she deleted was a corporate communication, not a financial record. Its destruction did not meet the threshold of corporate records as defined in Section 11.4 of the Employee Handbook. Nina Falk presented Ashford's case for 2 hours. The deletion was time-stamped during the active confrontation. The user logged into the portal, navigated to the specific email, deleted it, and then emptied the trash, a 4-step process inconsistent with routine maintenance. The memo was a material corporate communication regarding an ownership transition, the most significant event in the Bellecourt's operational history. Its deletion during a confrontation involving the CEO constituted deliberate obstruction. The arbitrator, a retired employment judge named Pauline Serrano, took the case under advisement. Her decision would arrive in 30 days. It arrived in 22. The termination was upheld. The arbitrator found that the deletion was deliberate, that the memo qualified as a corporate record under a reasonable interpretation of Section 11.4, and that termination was within the range of proportional discipline given the circumstances. Janine Pratt's career at the Bellecourt was officially over. She did not file the wrongful termination lawsuit Cal Meredith had been evaluating. She took a front desk position at a Hampton Inn in Mesa and did not list the Bellecourt on her resume. 6 months after the Saturday confrontation. Marshall stood in the Bellecourt lobby on a Wednesday morning. The chandelier still threw prismatic light across the ceiling. The marble floor still gleamed. The posted access sign still hung behind the concierge desk, level, the way Tomas had straightened it. The hotel looked the same, but it was not the same. The security director position had been filled by a woman named Corinne Hadley, former hotel security manager from a Hyatt in Portland, hired specifically for her background in de-escalation training and ADA compliance. Her first act had been to remove every unofficial memo from the back office walls, the lobby monitoring directive, the fabricated visitor registration policy, the unsigned documents that had governed the Bellecourt's 3-tiered sorting system for 2 years. The front desk staff had completed the anti-discrimination training. New guest services protocols had been implemented, posted, signed by the new interim general manager, referenced by policy number. The lobby monitoring policy had been replaced with a standard hospitality greeting protocol that applied to every visitor equally, regardless of whether they had a room key. The restaurant had a new host. Ronan Duff remained on the front desk, his probation ongoing, his clipboard absent. He greeted Marshall when he entered. "Good morning, Mr. Ridley," with a voice that was careful and a smile that was genuine, or close enough to it. Alma Reyes was still there, 11 years and counting. She no longer carried a feather duster as a prop for uncomfortable conversations. She carried it because it was part of her job, and her job was no longer asking her to do things that contradicted her conscience. Tomas Delgado was still at the valet stand. He nodded when Marshall arrived. Did not speak. The nod said everything the words didn't need to. Marshall walked the lobby, checked the fire inspection certificate, current, dated 6 weeks ago, checked the ADA ramp, clear, no luggage carts blocking access, checked the dumpster enclosure, gate repaired, new hinges, checked the stairwell door, new emergency lighting installed. Small things, operational things, the things that tell you whether a building is being maintained or merely occupied. He sat in the same leather chair near the business center corridor. The same chair he had sat in 6 months ago when Chet Bowman's hand had stopped him 12 feet from the revolving door. The leather was the same. The view was the same. The sign on the wall was the same. A woman walked through the revolving door. Black. Mid-30s. Business suit. Laptop bag over one shoulder. She walked past the security desk without breaking stride. Corinne Hadley glanced up, nodded a greeting. "Good morning, welcome to the Bellecourt," and returned to her monitor. No hand raised, no checkpoint, no question asked. The woman walked to the concierge desk, asked about meeting room availability, was given a brochure and directions to the second floor. Total interaction, 45 seconds. Unremarkable. Unmemorable. The kind of interaction that should be unremarkable and unmemorable in every hotel lobby, in every city, in every state. The kind that should not require a CEO to walk through the door to make possible. Marshall watched. Wrote nothing in his notebook. There was nothing to write. The absence of injustice does not generate documentation. It generates normalcy. And normalcy, the simple, invisible state of being treated like everyone else, was the most expensive thing this building had ever purchased. He sat for 20 more minutes, watched guests arrive, watched staff greet them, watched the lobby operate the way a lobby is supposed to operate, as a space where the sign on the wall and the behavior of the people beneath it tell the same story. Then he noticed something. On the wall behind the concierge desk, next to the posted access sign, a new frame had been mounted. Inside it, a single sheet of paper, typed, dated, signed by Corinne Hadley as security director and by the interim general manager. The Bellecourt Hotel is committed to treating every guest, visitor, and member of the public with dignity and respect. All individuals have equal access to public areas of this property, regardless of whether they are registered guests. No employee is authorized to deny access, demand identification, or contact law enforcement on the basis of appearance alone. Any employee who witnesses a violation of this policy is required to report it to management immediately. Bellecourt Hotel Anti-Discrimination Policy. Adopted, date, pursuant to Ashford Ventures Corporate Directive 2024-47. A new sign, next to the old sign. The old one said welcome. The new one explained what welcome was supposed to mean. It was a piece of paper. It was not justice. It was not transformation. It was not the end of the three-tiered sorting system that existed in 1,000 hotels across 100 cities. Hotels where the lobby looked clean and the policies looked fair, and the guests who were turned away were filed as resolved before anyone asked what resolved meant. But it was a start, a small printed framed wall-mounted start. But the room was different. Not because the room had changed, because the people in it had. Some by choice, some by consequence, some by the slow, grinding pressure of a system that had been forced to examine itself and had not liked what it found. Marshall opened his portfolio, passed the acquisition documents, now filed, archived, referenced in 3 active legal proceedings, passed the property assessment. Completed, 47 items checked, a new assessment underway for the next quarter. Passed the notebook, 13 pages of entries, each one dated, timed, and written in the handwriting of a man who understood that the only power stronger than authority is documentation. He reached the back flap. The photograph. His mother in her kitchen scrubs, squinting against the Arizona sun, name badge reading Eleanor, smile reading 32 years of invisible work. He held the photograph for a moment. Then he set it on the side table next to his coffee, visible, face up, where anyone who sat in this chair could see it. A woman in work scrubs, standing outside a kitchen door, smiling at the sun. Make sure they see us, baby. Not just in the kitchen, everywhere. He left the photograph on the table, stood up, walked to the elevator, pressed the button. The doors opened. He stepped inside. On the way up, he checked his phone. One new email from Roland Gaines. Subject, Ridgepoint. Final audit complete. The independent audit of Ridgepoint's work for Ashford Ventures had revealed that the consulting firm had conducted staffing assessments at 4 of the 6 properties it had been engaged to review. In each case, the assessment had identified operational issues, understaffing, maintenance deferrals, compliance gaps. In each case, the assessment had failed to identify patterns of discriminatory guest treatment, even though, in at least 2 cases, guest complaint records showed evidence of differential treatment similar to the Bellecourt's. The auditors concluded that Ridgepoint's assessments were structurally designed to evaluate operational efficiency rather than civil rights compliance, and that this design reflected either a deliberate omission or a systemic blind spot that rendered the assessments incomplete as instruments of due diligence. Either a deliberate omission or a systemic blind spot. 2 possibilities. One meant corruption. The other meant incompetence. Both meant that for 28 months, a consulting firm had been paid $900,000 to look at buildings and not see what was happening inside them. The audit's most damning finding was not about Ridgepoint. It was about Ashford Ventures. The audit noted that Ashford's standard acquisition due diligence process did not include a civil rights compliance review. Guest satisfaction scores were evaluated. Staffing ratios were benchmarked. Maintenance budgets were analyzed. But no one, not the acquisition team, not legal, not HR, had been tasked with asking a simple question. Are the guests at this property being treated equally? The question had not been asked because the answer had been assumed. The assumption was that a hotel with posted anti-discrimination signage and a standard employee handbook was, by definition, in compliance. The assumption was that the sign on the wall and the behavior of the people beneath it were the same thing. They were not the same thing. They had never been the same thing. And the gap between the sign and the behavior was where the 14 guests had fallen, into a space that no audit measured, no score captured, and no due diligence process was designed to detect. Marshall read the audit at his desk. Then he wrote an email to the board, not to Roland, not to Vivian, not through legal channels. A direct communication from the CEO to the board of directors, the kind he sent perhaps twice a year, the kind that started with, "I need to tell you something I learned," and ended with a request that cost money. The email said, "The Ridgepoint audit has revealed that our acquisition due diligence does not include civil rights compliance. We evaluate financial performance, physical condition, and operational efficiency, but we do not evaluate whether the properties we purchase are treating their guests equally. This is a gap. It is the gap that allowed the Bellecourt to operate a 3-tiered racial sorting system for 3 years while generating acceptable satisfaction scores and passing every audit we commissioned. I am requesting approval to add a mandatory civil rights compliance review to every future acquisition and to conduct retroactive reviews of all 147 properties currently in the portfolio. The estimated cost is $800,000 to $1.2 million. The cost of not doing it is the next Bellecourt." The reply came from Patricia Langford, board chair, in 4 minutes. "Approved. Start immediately." The approval was not a triumph. It was an admission that the company Marshall had built, the company that had signed his name to acquisition documents in 12 states, the company that employed thousands of people in 147 buildings, had been buying properties without asking whether those properties treated their guests like human beings. The 14 Bellecourt complaints were not an anomaly. They were a sample. And the population they were drawn from was 147 buildings worth of lobbies, restaurants, front desks, and elevator banks where the sign said "Welcome," and nobody had checked whether the people said the same thing. $800,000 to $1.2 million. That was the price of asking the question. The price of not asking. The lawsuits, the settlements, the EEOC complaints, the IA investigations, the reputational damage, the human cost of 14 people who had been told they did not belong in buildings that were supposed to serve everyone. That price was incalculable. And it was a price that had already been paid, in silence, by people whose names would never appear in an audit report. Marshall forwarded the approval to Vivian. Then he closed the laptop. The elevator doors opened on the 14th floor. Marshall stepped out into the corridor. The desert sun poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows. The same sun, the same light, the same heat that had baked this valley for 10,000 years and would bake it for 10,000 more. The kind of light that makes everything visible and nothing comfortable. He walked to his office, sat down, opened the audit file. 147 properties, 12 states, thousands of employees, thousands of guests, thousands of lobbies with posted signs that said one thing and people who did another. The work was not finished. It was barely begun. The Bellecourt had been one hotel, one lobby, one Saturday morning, one man in a polo shirt who happened to own the building. The 14 guests before him had not owned the building. They had not had Roland Gaines or Nina Falk or Vivian Okafor or a board that answered phone calls on Saturday mornings. They had had themselves, their dignity, their composure, their legal right to be in a public lobby, and it had not been enough. The sign had said, "Welcome." The people had said something else, and the gap between those two statements was the work. Not one hotel's work, not one CEO's work, everyone's. The desert sun moved across the floor. The file glowed on the screen, and somewhere in the Bellecourt's lobby, on a side table next to a leather chair near the business center corridor, a photograph of a woman in kitchen scrubs sat face up in the light, smiling at a world that was learning, slowly, painfully, one complaint and one consequence and one velvet rope at a time, to see her. This story is about a man who owned a building and was told he did not belong in it. But the real story is about the 14 people before him who were told the same thing and did not have a billion-dollar company, a general counsel, or a board of directors to prove them right. Marshall Ridley had power. He had resources. He had the ability to sit in a lobby for 2 hours and wait for the system to make mistakes while his legal team prepared the consequences. Most people do not have that. Most people who are told to leave a lobby They have every right to be in. Most people who are denied a restaurant table while watching someone else seated immediately. Most people who are grabbed by the wrist by a man in a uniform while a police officer watches and does nothing. Those people go home. They file it under another day. They absorb the cost in silence. And the machine keeps sorting. The lesson is not that justice is possible. It is that justice is expensive. It costs money, time, documentation, legal expertise, emotional endurance, and the willingness to fight a system that was designed to exhaust you before it acknowledges you. The 14 guests who were filed as resolved, guest departed voluntarily, did not lack courage. They lacked resources. And a system that only delivers accountability when the victim can afford a $600 an hour attorney is not a justice system. It is a pricing structure. So what do? We document. We record. We speak up. Not because speaking up guarantees results, but because silence guarantees nothing changes. We support the people who file complaints even when the process is slow. We build systems that do not require a CEO to walk through the door before someone asks why the sign says welcome and the people say leave. If this story moved you, share it. Not for views, not for engagement. For the next person standing in a lobby with every right to be there and no one willing to say so. Subscribe, hit the notification bell, and leave a comment telling me, what would you have done in that lobby? I read every single one.